District Board to order. Let the record reflect that all directors are present. Mrs. Craven, will you please lead us in the flag salute?
Certainly. Please stand. Place your hand over your heart and join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
No amendments, Chair Milche.
All right, and I don't have any speaker cards. All right. Then we're going to move on to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Please vote. Let the record reflect that it passes unanimously. Down to departmental, I have no items. Legal counsel, I have no items. Comments from staff?
None at this time.
No comments from staff. Comments from board members? And no comments from board members. I will hereby adjourn this meeting.
Okay, I'd like to call the regular camera successor agency for January 9th to order, please, and let the record reflect that all council is in attendance. Amendments to this agenda?
No amendments, Mayor.
Public comments for the camera successor agency. I don't have any cards. Seeing none, let's get down to item 3. It's the consent calendar.
Move the approval. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. That passes unanimously. Okay, so no department or legal. Is there any comments of staff at this time?
No comments, Mayor.
Comments of staff. Any comments from board members at this time? Seeing none, we will adjourn. Right now, I'd like to call the regular City Council meeting for January 9th to order, please. And let the record reflect that all council members are present. Amendments to this agenda. Is there any amendments?
No amendments, Mayor.
Amendments. We do not have any presentation. It gets down to consent calendar. I believe Vice Mayor Tremblay had a couple of comments.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I had, if we could pull items F as in Frank and item J as in John for a couple, for more questions. And I have a couple of brief questions on items D and G respectively. I think we leave that on, my thought was leave that on consent calendar. I just have brief questions on those.
Would you like to handle the questions on item D and G right now? Or are they just simple questions that need
Simple questions.
some answers? Okay. Why don't we go down and could we do that right now? Can we just get the questions on item?
Got to move the other two.
Okay, let's go down and see about moving the consent calendar. Oh, by the way, is there any other ones that anybody else wants pulled?
No, I also had a question about D.
Okay. So let's approve the consent items, less these items here.
Well, he didn't ask his questions.
Okay, oh, you want to ask some questions? Okay. Mr. Tremblay, is it item D? All right, item D. Let's do that first.
Okay. On item D, the police facility staff restroom remodel project, on big page 3 with the consultant's contract, there is a reference to LMA will conduct a meeting with Camarillo PD Steering Committee. What's the Camarillo PD Steering Committee? Who comprises that?
Councilmember Tremblay, the committee at the time of this project is the Administrative Services Director at that time was Richard Petropoulos, so I would be sitting in that position. Also, Mr. Thomas and Mr. Kevin, our facilities maintenance manager.
Okay. And is there anybody from the Sheriff's Department in attendance at that meeting?
I'm not sure. John?
It's the police department's facility, so I'm thinking that there's somebody from the Sheriff's Department that's going to be there.
Kevin, do you?
Okay. I'll take that as a yes. Thanks, Kevin. Okay. All right. That's my question on item D.
And I believe it's item G, Mr. Tremblay.
I think Mr. Mayor and Mr.
Oh, I'm
Boucher
sorry.
had a
Mr.
question.
Boucher, sorry
Just a few
about that.
questions following up on item D. I wasn't here when we initially approved it going out to RFP, but there are 2 restrooms involved, not one, right?
Yes, that's correct. It's 2 restrooms. It's the women's and the men's police staff restrooms. It comprises about, in total, a square footage of about 530 square feet.
And they mentioned persistent plumbing issues. Can you just very, very briefly go over those, what those are exactly?
Right, okay. So we have, currently the majority of the water closets and the urinals are unusable, so they're out of service, and that's consistent in both bathrooms. We've had some major sewer line flow blockages, which is requiring our city staff to go there on a weekly basis and make some maintenance repairs. Mr. Jorgensberg is here too, our facilities manager, and he can also give us additional detail if there's something in addition he'd like to add.
And in terms of the cost of the $35,000 and the project cost overall, what we anticipate the project cost to be, can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. The $35,000 is an approximately 50% of the expected cost. At least right now, the estimated construction cost is about $226,000, so that's about 15% of the cost, which is customary for the design services for this type of project.
Something between 10 and 15% is what I would
Right.
probably expect as well.
That's right.
Okay.
This contract or this agreement would be a firm fixed cost, meaning that there are no contingencies expected.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on this one?
I think that it'd be good to move F to maybe Public Works and G to Community Services.
That may go, so that would be item F. And then the next one is item, I believe it's J.
Oh, J, I thought he said G. No. Oh, I'm,
There's no G?
Okay.
I'd like to pull item F,
yeah,
item J.
yeah, J, I thought you said G, I'm sorry.
Okay, so F we will put,
It still goes to
that
Community
Public Works?
Service, yeah.
yeah. Okay, so J goes into.
Community Services, I think.
Where?
Community Services?
It actually is Public Works.
Public
Public
Works?
Works.
Both of them.
Yeah, they're both public works.
Hang on, item J. Okay, so Mr. Trim, I think you just had a question on item G, I believe now, is that
I did,
right?
and my question is, this is on the new, this is on the water drop, now that I have my microphone on, this is on the water drops car wash item, and Mr. Klotzel, the estimated acre-foot usage of water for the new car wash, because 90% of the water is being recycled, is at 2.649 acre-feet per year, or AFY, as opposed to the prior restaurant, which is at 3.088. My question to you, acre-feet per year, so it's less than what the restaurant was using. My question to staff is, are you confident that those figures are correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so
So
that gets,
with F and J having been pulled, I will move approval of the consent calendar with the exception of those 2 items.
Second.
there's a motion and a second on the table. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Okay, that passes unanimously. All right, so that gets us down to City Council, and it's the Planning Commission appointments here. So do we have a staff report on that?
Yes, this item is to provide the opportunity for our newly elected council members to appoint their planning commissioners. And I would defer to the council members to provide information about each of their appointments. And then the recommended action would be to adopt a resolution appointing the planning commissioners to the Planning Commission.
All right, so with that, who would like to start? Mrs. Craven?
My nominee for the Planning Commission is Luis Espinosa. Mr. Espinosa and his family have lived in Camarillo for 20 years. His children attended Camarillo schools, and he believes that Camarillo is a wonderful place to live, raise a family, and retire. Before retirement, Mr. Espinosa was a career firefighter for the city of Ventura. Like all firefighters, he's concerned about many aspects of safety, but I chose him because he is more of a big picture guy. He's able to step in, assess a situation, and then make a decision, whether it's popular or not, based on the facts he's found and the evidence he's observed. More recently, he distinguished himself by accepting the position of acting fire chief for the city of Santa Paula when that position unexpectedly became open. He found a department in desperate need of help, and after assessing the situation completely, he worked with other members of city administration staff to begin and complete the lengthy process of disbanding the city's fire department and having that area added to the county fire district, which is providing better service than the city alone could provide at a lower cost. Luis is a good friend, an avid tennis fan, and a good cook, so I ask for your support for Luis Espinosa's appointment to the Planning Commission.
Well, thank you, Mr. Espinosa. I know you're in attendance. Would you like to make any comments or any time? This is a time to do it if you so feel comfortable enough to do it. Welcome.
Mayor, members of the council, thank you for having me here. I just, first of all, want to extend a thank you to Charlotte for giving me this opportunity and placing her faith and trust in me. It's an important role to play in the city, and I'm honored and privileged to be able to be appointed or recommended for appointment for Planning Commission. I really, I think a lot and have been here now for 20 years in Camarillo, and there are a lot of good works that have gone on before me. So I just hope to be able to serve this community in the best way I can and, do well for our citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions? Well, welcome, and I know you'll be a terrific asset.
Thank you.
Thank you, wife, for allowing you to spend time with us. Next, Susan, would you like to go next?
My nominee is Beverly Vandermeulen. Beverly has lived in Camarillo for 14 years, but her roots in Camarillo go back to 1977 because her mother lived in Leisure Village since then. So she's been part of this community since that time, and she's seen it evolve, and she's been a part of our community for many years. Her background is in real estate and property appraisal, mortgage, and both in the private and government sector. She has state appraisal certifications, and she's worked on value-related court cases. She serves on the Leisure Village Finance Committee, and she was elected to the Leisure Village Board last year. When I met Beverly, I was impressed by her knowledge of the developments in town, past and present, her level of participation that she's already had on her own with developers and public hearings for developments. I was impressed by her thoughtful and deliberate way that she considered these plans, including thinking about more of the details and how it affects the surrounding communities and our community going into the future. And lastly, I was impressed by her dedication and desire to serve our community. Finally, I am pleased to note that Beverly will be the first woman to serve on the Planning Commission since 1995, which is 23 years ago. While I did not choose Beverly because she's a woman, it's always refreshing when an intelligent, hardworking, and committed woman steps up to serve our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, terrific. Beverly, are you here? Would you like to make some comments? Welcome.
A little hard after all of that. But I want to thank Susan Santangelo for her recommendation and her support, and all of you council members for considering my position. I grew up in San Fernando Valley. Then I ended up spending 32 years in Phoenix, but coming back and forth visiting here since 1977, and watching both Phoenix and Maricopa County grow tremendously while watching Camarillo and Ventura grow tremendously in those time frames. So I've been back now, and I've retired from Ventura County in 2014 from working 10 years in the assessor's office there, and I've been getting more active in the community issues for the last 3 years. So I just want to say thank you for the consideration, the support, and I look forward to serving the city of Camarillo in a position that I'll actually be able to use a field that has been a long-time passion of mine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or anything? Thank you so much. Thrilled. Absolutely. Next, Mr. Mulchay, would you like to?
Absolutely. My nominee for Planning Commission is Gene Talmadge. Gene and his wife Janet have been residents here in Camarillo since 1987, so for over 30 years. He's got a deep bench of experience, and that was something that drew me to Gene. He's also a man of sound character, and I know he'll be objective in the decisions that he makes. He was a career officer in the U.S. Navy, Director of Public Works Services, Regional Planning Director of the San Diego Navy Complex. After that, he worked for the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District. He was a planning administrator. He implemented and administered the GIS system, this Geographic Information System, prepared water and recycled water demand studies, and also the urban water management plans for the district. And he also managed all the environmental programs and the CEQA compliance as it flowed through, as the water district dealt with. He is retired, but after retiring from Las Virgenes, he worked as an independent consultant, preparing CEQA documents and water resource planning documents for public agencies. His education includes a Bachelor's of Architecture from USC, go Trojans, and a Master of Urban Planning with Certificate in Urban Design from the University of Washington. His professional affiliations includes being a past state president of the California Association of Environment Professionals, the American Planning Association, Association of Water Agencies in Ventura County, and Military Officers Association of America as a state regional vice president.
Great. Mr. Talmadge, would you like to make some comments?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'm very pleased to be here this evening, and I'm excited about the appointment as a member of the Planning Commission. I have a long background. I've lived in Camarillo actually 2 different times. Once when I was in high school in 61 to 63, which predated most of the roads that we know of around here. But my dad was in the Navy. We transferred and moved away, and then I returned while in the Navy and never left. And I thoroughly enjoy Camarillo, and I think this is an opportunity for me to be a part of the city. I've been a member living here, but not really part of what's going on, and I feel this is a great opportunity to do that. So thank you so much for the appointment, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you so much, Gene. Welcome. Okay. I'm sorry? So any comments? Mr. Tremblay, would you like to make a comment?
That's fine.
I just wanted to make the comment that I think all 3 of the individuals who are recommended for appointment are very well qualified. I want to express my personal appreciation to each and every one of you for your upcoming service to the city. It is a real pleasure to have you aboard. I don't have the pleasure of knowing Mr. Espinoza or Ms. Vandermeulen. I do have the privilege of knowing Mr. Talmadge. And again, I think all 3 of you are very well qualified. So with that, I am happy to make a motion if the mayor would. So I will go ahead and move the resolution appointing Luis Espinoza, Eugene Talmadge, and Beverly Vandermeulen as planning commissioners for the city of Camarillo.
Second.
So motion is second. Any further discussion? I want to make one comment. Terrific appointments to my colleagues up here, outstanding individuals. I know you're going to do a very, very good job, and I thank all of you for your service here. I really appreciate it. With that, let's vote, please. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, that's going to get us down to Public Works. It's on the consent calendar. Let's do item F. I believe Vice Mayor Tremblay had a question on that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Klotz, this one gets lobbed to you. As I read the staff report on this, this is on the Conference Center Drain project, and it's an amendment to the PSA for testing and evaluation inspection. And I don't have any issue with regard to the amendment to the agreement. What concerned me, though, is that in the 3rd paragraph, and I quote, During construction, a number of issues arose on the project, primarily related to the consistency of the dimensions of the precast concrete box segments, creating discontinuities between concrete segments and larger than normal gaps between the segment joints when placed on site, end quote. Now, I know that those are being resolved, but why was that the situation to begin with? Is that an engineering issue or a manufacturing issue, or neither of those two and some third?
In very simple terms, it's more of a manufacturing challenge that was presented because of the extremely large size of these boxes, especially the larger box. We had two boxes going in, two separate conduits, if you will, with the precast boxes. This manufacturer actually stated this was the largest box that they had been hired to manufacture, and so the specialized forms and just the ultimate size of the box that was being cast and formed presented challenges with yielding consistent sizes. The tolerances were small enough that we could remedy the situation in the field, and that's being finalized right now. So essentially, short answer is it's based on the very large size of these boxes presented some manufacturing challenges that were then remedied.
Well, okay, so were the manufacturing challenges, I take it those weren't something that were really fully appreciated prior to the conception of work?
That's accurate.
Would that be an accurate statement? Yes. Is the manufacturer making some changes relative to the pricing or modifications relative to the pricing of the structures? Because the discontinuities, as it were, has triggered some additional costs.
Correct.
So I'd like to know what we're going to do or what the manufacturer is going to do, if anything, to remedy that.
Right. The manufacturer is responsible for providing, and in combination with the contractor, because we have a prime contractor, Granite Construction, and then their sub, the manufacturer, is Jensen Precast.
Okay, it's their sub.
So
all right.
the contractor and their manufacturer are responsible for delivering the project construction that is to plans and specifications at the cost that was bid. So these remedies that they put into place both during the manufacturing, they made the changes necessary to remedy the situation with the variances in the dimensions, and with how they were setting up their forms and their process. It was modified as they in early goings to fix that, and we aren't seeing any additional cost for that. And the remedies in the field addressing some of the larger gaps is all at the cost of the contractor and their supplier, the manufacturer.
Are we going to see a deductive change order then from the contractor, or we're not going to see any such deductive order?
Right. No, they're providing the new precast concrete boxes in the ground per plan and spec at the cost that was contracted for.
So that then in turn did not cause this agreement amendment to come about.
So
correct?
it did in partly, yes. There was additional inspection and testing services needed to verify the quality of the final product.
Well, if that's the case, why wouldn't there be a deductive change order from the contractor, because the city has incurred additional expense?
So another element that complicates the situation is we aren't in direct contract with the contractor on this project, and a refresh on the situation here is the current landowner, Meehan Development, who's developing the property, purchased the property from the city, and with the condition that the needed replacement of the concrete box drain or open channel drain that was there was going to be performed by the developer. And since that was the drain is owned and on the property still owned by the city, and that drain needed to be replaced because of the deteriorating condition, the condition was that the developer would contract for the replacement and the city would reimburse for those the cost of the replacement.
But
so we don't have a direct contractual relationship with the contractor. we have the agreement that says we're going to reimburse the developer for the construction of that box, and then we're performing we perform the design, and then are also performing the construction management and inspection services, because that we are going to own the box. I mean, it's our ultimately our box.
Oh, I was going to say in a manner of speaking. Okay. Well, but all kidding aside, though, notwithstanding that our privity, the city's not in privity of contract with the contractor in this case, our discussion appropriately then would be with the developer. And I'm just interested in knowing whether or not, because of these discontinuities, if there were additional costs associated that would require the city to reimburse over and above what the city originally thought it would have to, whether or not that's something we're going to be talking to the developer about.
So there is the opportunity to do that. Again, the majority of these additional inspection costs were more related to the schedule and the need for overtime inspection because of the need to get the box constructed and in the ground before the rains. And so the manufacturing, again, not originally anticipated in NV5's original agreement, was the amount of overtime inspection that was then required to meet the schedule for getting the box in the ground. So additional inspection to verify quality is that overtime inspection is the bulk of this additional $30,000 additive. And I will mention that, the original $80,000 agreement, as typical, we included contingency. So we had a $12,000 contingency for these types of unforeseen additional work. So it's an additional $18,000 above that for this total $30,000 additive amendment. But all that to say that the majority of this additional cost is for that overtime additional inspection required, and some of it, again, more of a minor part for these inconsistencies with or the challenges with the manufacturing, if you will. And like I said, there is an opportunity to pursue a deductive item on that. Staff's opinion is the amount of time and effort from staff and legal effort on that would likely outweigh the amount of deduction on that. So we haven't done the math on that, but it'll be very cumbersome to go through that process with this, especially with a contractual arrangement.
So, well, I'm not sure I agree with you on that, because deductive change orders can be very simple. I've seen deductive change orders at one page, but I understand the amount of effort that it goes into it. I'm not opposed to this item, but I would anticipate, or at least hope, that when this comes back for next time not on this contract, I'm okay with this contract, but when this comes back for the next report, I personally would like to hear a status report on the discussions with the developer relative to this, because if it's not an engineering issue, then we're paying a lot of money for this, bottom line, and I want to make sure that we're getting the best bang for the buck.
So along that vein, we don't anticipate another item coming back or a report on this. The construction is the boxes are done. We've made the first reimbursement payment to the developer for the first portion of boxes that were installed. That agreement's previously approved by City Council, laying out that arrangement. And
you're not bringing back a second reimbursement approval to the council? That's going to be done ministerially through the contract?
Correct.
Well, I would personally ask that when it's time to discuss, you ought to discuss that with the developer and say, here's what's happened. And
we can discuss that with them.
And prior to doing that reimbursement number 2, make some concession for this. So that concludes my questions on this one.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve item F on the consent?
So move.
I'll second.
Okay, motion and second. Any further discussion, please vote. Okay, that passes 5-0. So that gets us down to item J on the consent calendar. Do you have a question on that, Vice Mayor?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess this seems to be my night. This is on Camino Ruiz, and this is on the resolution approving the parcel map and acknowledging receipt of agreement. And this may be a Mr. Vaca question as well as Mr. Klotzel. But as I read this, this is going through Public Works, but it's submission of the parcel map with the, and this is the property immediately to the east correct, east of Tessa Robles. The question I have for you is, if the council approves this, noting, wait a minute, let me start again. Noting that there's already a referral and studies are being done with respect to a potential change in land use for parcels 3 and 4, if I have that correctly on this map, what impact, if any, does this approval of this parcel map have on that process?
They're separate from one another. There is no impact.
So, rephrasing it, Mr. Vaca, the council could approve this parcel map, but it doesn't change anything with regard to the referral, nor ultimately the council's discretion in whether to make any discretionary approvals in the future regarding
That's
these
correct.
4 parcels. Okay.
And I provided an aerial photograph of the property just for your reference. So they are in the process of demolishing this building. It's known as the bunker building, and this other ancillary industrial building. And the plan is right now with this parcel map to preserve these 2 office buildings, which are vacant at this time.
Okay, and just to make sure I'm clear, though, it doesn't impact our discretion in any manner.
No.
Relative to that referral and any ultimate discretionary approvals coming out of that, correct?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Need a
Move the
motion?
approval.
There's a motion and a second on item J on consent. Please vote. That passes unanimously. All right, so that gets us down to city manager, and it's the fiscal year 18-19 community support funding agreement with the Camarillo Chamber of Commerce for startups of Ventura County. Do we have a staff report on that?
Good evening. The report is relatively short. We're here before you this evening requesting that you approve a $10,000 sponsorship agreement for this year's Startup Weekend for prospective business entrepreneurs. The event is known as the Startups Ventura County SVC and will be held in April. This event I see as a very important component of our economic development strategic plan. It really highlights the fact that Camarillo innovates. It gives the entrepreneurs the opportunity to demonstrate their skills, demonstrate their ideas to a panel of seasoned chief executive officers as well as to the public. And I think very much it does demonstrate that Camarillo embraces innovation and entrepreneurship. In the past, several of the participants in this program have been very successful and are continuing to move forward. For example, RepWatch now has a website, XP Health, and they really get involved in pre- and post-op orthopedic therapy. Another one, Field Force, deals on the water efficiency side of things. Food Origins is based really looking at the Internet of Things, dealing with harvesting and packaging of food and food safety through tracking. iCode is one from last year, actually. They were a second-place winner, and they're looking at emergency operations, how that can be done more effectively. Hego Energetics is looking at carbon dioxide emissions and climate change, and there's several others. I think it's an event that has been very successful, and I think that the $10,000 requested of the city is a very good investment in order to keep this event going. So that's what we're here for today, and Gary Cushing from the Chamber of Commerce is here should you have any additional questions.
Any questions from anyone at this?
I do have
Yes, Mr. Mulchay.
a question of Mr. Cushing.
Yes.
Besides the city, what other sponsors at this level have you guys secured, or are you guys seeking?
The city has been a sponsor of this now. This would be the 4th year, and it's been at the $10,000 level for each year. We have a request out from the county at $5,000. We have past sponsors is Semtech. They've been a $5,000 sponsor. Meisner Filtration's been a $5,000 sponsor. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones up the hill. They used to be in Camarillo. I can't think of the name right now. We're another $5,000 sponsor.
How many entrants do you guys expect?
Well, last year, we've changed it over the years to make sure that the groups that are coming are now really able to become companies and move forward. Last year we had, I think, 24 apply, and we took 17 groups.
Perfect. That's all I got.
Anything else for Mr. Cushing? Okay, thank you, Chair.
Move the approval.
Second.
There's a
I'll give
motion
you-
and a second. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. That passes unanimously. Thank you. Great program. Okay, so we are going to get down to item B. It's a sidewalk vending ordinance amending Camarillo Municipal Code, which the action is to continue to January 23rd. Counselor, should we get any reports at this time, or?
My thought is that you, as you have indicated, it's going to be continued to January 23rd. If there's anyone in the audience who wanted to make a comment about the item and won't be able to be here on the 23rd, I think you should give them that opportunity if there are any.
Okay, is there anybody that would like to address the council on this issue? Seeing no one come forward, could I just decree that we're going to continue this to January 23rd, or do we have to vote on it?
No, you don't need to vote. That's fine.
Okay, so with that, we will revisit this issue on January 23rd. All right, that gets us down to legislative matters, policy 1.01. Do we have a staff report on that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, Mr. Norman will do that.
Since 2014, we have had a legislative committee that would draft a legislative platform. The legislative platform it serves as the guidebook to how the staff responds to proposed legislation that's going through primarily the state level, and then we respond to some federal legislation. The practice has been fairly cumbersome and up to this point, and has really hampered our efforts to timely respond to legislation. And it would go like this. The legislative committee would make some draft changes to the legislative platform, and then it would go to the city council, and then it would be approved. And then after that, the legislative committee would meet yet again, and analysis would be done on a slate of bills, and staff would work through that analysis. It would be, and then positions would be determined or recommended by the legislative committee, and then it would go to city council, debated, and then we would have staff would have guidance about whether to support or oppose or watch various pieces of legislation. Well, that would make the legislative platform of little practical effect, because the council approves the legislative platform and basically says, okay, for these issues, this is what we believe should be our position. So we're proposing to streamline this by, number one, eliminating the legislative committee and having the policy committee do or make up the draft legislative platform for city council's approval. After that, staff would be reviewing bills of interest to the city and would be taking action based on the platform to either support or oppose or to watch pieces of legislation. We would draft letters and send them off to the appropriate committees and to our legislative lobbyist, Gonzalez and Sons. If there was a situation, a piece of legislation where I could not determine the city's interest based on the adopted platform, then I would convene the policy committee. We could review that piece of legislation, and then we can bring it forward to the city council. But that would be a fairly rare occurrence in my experience. Of course, all letters that we put out based on legislation would be distributed to the city council so they could see what actions we're taking on various pieces of legislation. So that's our proposal.
Any questions? Mrs. Craven?
I don't have a question. I have a comment on it.
Okay, any questions at this particular point? Okay, let's do a comment. Ms. Craven? Please.
Okay, Mike, I was on the legislative committee when this was proposed I was on the city council when we adopted this in 2014. This is the way it had been intended back then. However, there was some discomfort on the city council with having any piece of legislation simply looked at in terms of a platform that had been approved by the city council. And at least one member of the city council wanted to look at every single bill before we could really take a position on that bill. And it really has delayed things because staff has to go through this long list of bills, not knowing which bill any particular city council member might be really interested in, and not been able to send off letters when they're in the early committee hearings. And I think that's the biggest problem with the way it is now. It's just too cumbersome and slow. And understanding that there could be up to 1,800 bills introduced in any particular year, it gets pretty cumbersome, and it can also mean, well, I just think that it's better this way. If the real discussion should be when the platform comes to the city council, because then it talks about every single thing. I cannot imagine something that would be introduced that wouldn't be included within the scope of the platform, but the legislature has surprised me many times, and I'm sure there will be things coming along that we don't, every once in a while, that we haven't conceived happening. So it doesn't mean no legislation individually would come to us, but it does mean that it would streamline it. And it also means that early on, we'll be able to have our druthers heard. You know, it means that we don't wait till March or April when things are out of their first committee and going on. So that's my comment.
Any other comments of this?
Yeah, one comment. Obviously, being new, I haven't had to interface or interact with our current way of dealing with legislation. I know government gets a bad rap for being cumbersome and slow at times, and I definitely see this as a way of making it a little bit more dynamic and streamlined, and where we can move a little bit faster and definitely have more influence. So I'm all for this.
Any other comments? I'll make a quick comment. I think this is needed, especially at this time. I think it'll allow our city to get in the game somewhat earlier, and the earlier, typically, the better on this. So I think this is a very positive step here. So with that, someone like to make with the will of the council here? Mr. Tremblay?
I'll move that the council adopt amendments to Policy 2.02, Legislation and Legislative Matters, and Policy 1.01, City Council Reorganization Committees and Appointments as set forth in the staff report.
I'll second.
There's a motion to second. Any further discussion on this? Please vote. That passes unanimously. Okay, so that gets down to the closed session items. Councilor, would you like to say the magic words on the closed session?
Yes, I can do that. We have 3 closed sessions. First one is a conference with legal counsel on existing litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D1. The name of the case is Southwest Voter Registration Education Project versus the City of Camarillo. The second one is real property negotiations. The property's addresses is 15 Stearman Street, 280 Skyway Drive, and 330 Skyway Drive. The agency negotiators are listed in the agenda. The negotiating parties include the Oxnard Union High School District. Under negotiation are price and terms of payment. And our third closed session is also real property negotiations. This has to do with the former fire station on Ventura Boulevard. The agency negotiators are listed in the agenda. The negotiating parties, St. Mary Magdalene School. Under negotiation, price and terms of payment.
Okay, so those are the legal explanation of our pending closed session items. So let's get down. Let's get down to new business here. Mr. City Manager, do you have anything you'd like to add tonight?
No, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
City Attorney, anything tonight?
I have no items.
Okay. All right, we'll get down to City Council. Why don't we start with Ms. Santangelo? Would you like to share anything with us tonight, Ms. Santangelo?
Just to report that I attended the City Council special meeting on December 19th.
Thank you. Ms. Craven, anything tonight?
I have several things. I attended the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency meeting on December 14th, the Policy Committee on December 19th, the Special City Council meeting on December 19th, the Regional Defense Partnership meeting yesterday morning, along with Mr. Mulchay, the Camarillo Ranch Foundation board meeting last night, and on January 4th, I also did a tour of Camarillo Airport and met with its acting director. That was done before the first meeting, since I will be on the Airport Authority Board starting tomorrow night. I also have three other things. First is and I forgot to bring it, but I'm going to get it to the city clerk, and I'd like her to distribute it to the council members. An LA Times article from a couple of Sundays ago, a very extensive article on the mud flows in Montecito and what happened there, and the actions that Santa Barbara County took and didn't take. And some of it was compared to what we did here in Camarillo, and I thought it was a very interesting article. At the end of the article, you think we did the right things. And so, but it wasn't an article about Camarillo. It just had some comparisons, in mentioning and things. But I will bring that in because I thought it was a very good article. And it brought up problems that can happen, and it's good for all of us to keep that in our minds. I have two other types of things. One is I've gotten several calls. It must be that people, especially senior citizens, give themselves things like bathroom remodelings for Christmas. Because these all came right around Christmas. And I've gotten some calls from people wanting to know about our requirement for electronic bathroom faucets in residential bathrooms. And so I don't know if this is something that can be answered now. What they wanted to know is if there are problems, if there are situations when those requirements can be forgiven or waived, or if we could look at the possibility of not having it. In their minds, the faucets are extremely expensive, at least the ones they found were extremely expensive, and they felt that because of the length of time the water's on, it doesn't save much water. And the other complaint is that you can't really easily adjust the heat of the water. You have to get down under, apparently, and adjust that. And down under is usually inside a cabinet. And well, they were complaints from from the callers, and I had three callers, was that it's not so easy to get down under and adjust those things in the dark. So I'm not asking for an explanation now, but maybe if it's easy, maybe you can. But that's one question I've been asked.
So with the updates to the plumbing code under our building code, the council elected to provide additional water conservation elements with amendments to the plumbing code, one of which is that lavatories use the mechanical faucets for operation. So it's in our plumbing code. We do receive complaints from time to time. I think generally on average they are typically a little bit more expensive than your traditional faucets. And if someone had a medical issue that created a problem with those faucets, we do have a reasonable accommodation procedure and program that we can go through, but it does require a letter from a medical representative. And other than that, I think that generally addresses your questions.
So Are they something that came through as a recommendation from somebody that we adopt them, or were they required? I know some of the changes to the building codes, we don't have much discretion in.
No, it's above and beyond what the traditional building code requirements are, and the city council adopted those as amendments to the plumbing code.
Right. I'm
It
wondering,
also includes the recirculation pump on hot water heaters is another one of the requirements that's above and beyond what the traditional building code would require that we've
did we
enacted.
require the circulation one, or just that there be a hot water heater in every location except the
Well,
kitchen?
no, if you're replacing a hot water heater, it does require a recirculation.
Oh, replacing a hot water, okay. But for new construction, it's the little ones every place but the kitchen, is that right?
Correct, lavatories.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any interest in looking at that. I would be interested in finding out exactly how much water those things save if we're looking at them. I'm not sure they save any water. We did adopt it as a water conservation thing. I'd like to look at that one again. I don't know about the rest of the council.
Mr. Tremblay, do you have?
We've had recent personal experience with those water fixtures, and they have been, I'm trying to find the charitable term, problematic. I would like to see this item brought back to a study. I know we can't talk about it, it's not on the agenda, but perhaps we could have it come back on a study session, as a study session item. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, we'll find the appropriate forum to bring it back for
Okay.
discussion and get some new direction from the city.
Thank you.
Mr. Mulchay, did you have?
I want to echo exactly as Mr. Tremblay and Mrs. Craven. I hear the same complaints, and being in the in the industry, we hear it tremendously from contractors we work with and clients.
You probably hear them more than I did, but I got 3 calls right around Christmas when I wasn't really thinking of things like that.
So we hear it frequently as well, I'll be honest, and it's something that I think staff would be happy to bring back.
Okay, I got another call, and it was a call about something that's in our code, and Mr. Vaca explained it to me, but I'm going to bring it up too and see if other people are interested in discussing this one. It isn't a policy, it's in the code, that there can be no construction on holidays that the city celebrates, and construction permits issued for those days. And it's so that people, as he explained to me, people who are home and resting on a holiday aren't hearing noise from contractors. And this apparently doesn't involve if you're doing it yourself. It's only for things that contractors are doing. So I guess I understand the major holidays, especially the national holidays that are, 4th of July and things like that. But I'm not so sure about Martin Luther King Day, Columbus Day, Veterans Day, and other days like that when people might want to be around to make sure things were done right, even though they've hired a contractor to do it. So I don't know if there's any interest in people discussing the days that that permits are issued for or not, but I thought I'd bring it up to see, because there's no other way to find out.
Comments? I'll make a comment. I'd like to maybe revisit that as well and just see what our options are. Anyone else?
I'm open.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So that's all I had.
All right. We'll get down to Mr. Mulchay. Do you have anything tonight for us?
Yes, I have been a busybody since December 12th when we last debriefed. Thursday, December 13th, I attended the Dental Arts ribbon cutting. It was put on by the Chamber of Commerce. They are off of Cali Tecate. It's right down the street from the Camera Ranch House. Got to meet Dr. Ariel, and she has a top-notch facility there, all brand new equipment, and I think they're going to be very successful. Saturday, December 15th, I, along with Vice Mayor Tremblay, attended the National Wreaths Across America Day. It was organized by Forest Fields, and that was out at the Conejo Mountain Memorial Park. It was a great ceremony, and afterwards we took the wreaths and had laid them at the headstones of veterans. Saturday, December 15th, also, again, Vice Mayor Tremblay and I attended the Eagle Scout ceremony for Nicholas Fitz. Great young man, and he's got a lot of enthusiasm along with his whole troop. Thursday, December 20th, I attended a ribbon cutting at the Katie Thompson Vineyard Estates, again with Vice Mayor Tremblay. Yes, I know. We keep showing up. They're off of Poncha Road. They're technically not within the city, just slightly outside its limits, but it's a beautiful event venue, and they cater to weddings, corporate events, anything from 100 to 125 people or less. Didn't necessarily do this on behalf of the city council or on behalf of the city. Christmas Eve, I delivered presents and food to families in need throughout Santa Paula through the Santa Paula Rotary Club, and that was a terrific, and it's something I and my family do every single year, and it's incredibly rewarding. Friday, January 4th, I met with Jorge Rubio, interim director of the Camarillo Airport, and we took a tour and just kind of familiarized myself, being on the airport authority, familiarized myself with the Camarillo Airport, some of the things they are looking at, discussing how the airport operates. Tuesday, January 8th, or yesterday, attended with Mrs. Craven, the Regional Defense Partnership, out at the County Government Center. They had announced that they had secured the Blue Angels for 2020.
Right,
So-
October,
They just said the fall.
the end of September, early October. It's the first time since that plane crashed out there, so that's
So
wonderful.
Blue Angels 2020. I'm really excited about that. Also, yesterday evening, I attended the Camarillo Ranch Foundation board meeting along with, again, Mrs. Craven. And that is all I have. The only comment in regards to questions or emails I'm getting is in regards to E.J. Harrison, and that a lot of people are complaining that their calls are not being returned, particularly around Christmas time when they're requesting pickup of large items. So I don't know if there's a phone call or something we can do. Some people just say that sometimes they just get nothing but a voicemail and often not a call back.
Yes, we'll follow up on that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Mayor Tremblay, anything tonight?
Just a couple of things. Meetings since the 19th. I seen Mr. Milche and I seem to be everywhere together, so I'll just, without going through, I attended the events that he attended. Had a December... That's the shorthand. December 19th, Policy Committee meeting with Mrs. Craven. A couple of quick things. First of all, in Jeffrey, I did not bring, to the city clerk, I did not bring extra copies with me, but in this month's January 2019 monthly magazine of the League of California Cities, Western City, there are a couple of very good articles, but there are two in particular. One we'll get to later tonight, but another one talks about the qualities of exceptional city councils. And I thought it was a very good article, and I want to make sure to bring it to the attention of my colleagues who have probably already read the article, but I want to make sure that they read it. I think it's well done. The second thing I wanted to just talk about briefly, and that's with regard to the Clean Power Alliance. My understanding is that there is a mailer, a separate mailer from the city, either, Mr. Norman, the mailer from the city, has that already gone out, or is it about to go out?
It's in the process of being mailed.
In the process of being mailed. Okay. I just wanted to bring it to people's attention, anybody watching television tonight. The city is sending out its own mailer in addition to all of the statutorily required mailers that the Clean Power Alliance has been sending out and is in the process of sending out. So it's additional city outreach by mail in addition to the social media outreach that the city has been engaging in on the website and Facebook and the City Scene newsletter, et cetera. In case anybody is watching, the City Council a few months ago picked the 36% default tier as the tier that residents will receive unless they decide to opt to either the 50% renewable energy tier or the 100% renewable energy tier. And beginning February 1, city residents will be served by Clean Power Alliance, but city residents should also know that they have the ability to opt out of Clean Power Alliance and to remain with Southern California Edison and at whatever tier they so decide, if that's their choice. So there's a great deal of flexibility. There's a lot of information that's coming out right now. And I would also suggest that if folks have questions, they go to the website for the Clean Power Alliance. It's cleanpoweralliance.org. There is also a rate calculator on that website. I know I've received at least one email that's been critical of that rate calculator, and I having just got back into town, I haven't had time to go take a look at that. But have you looked at that rate calculator, Mr. Norman?
Yeah, in fact, my staff has, and we've made contact with CPA about those concerns.
Okay, in terms of trying to modify?
Yes.
That rate calculator. Okay, good, because that's something I was going to discuss.
My CPA flyer arrived this afternoon. Oh, very good.
Okay, good. All right, so we're doing some additional outreach over and above what is required, and that's it as far as my report.
Okay, great. Okay, so I attended the City Council special meeting December 19th. Also, the VRSD meeting December 20th, and January 4th, we had a city selection committee, which was a very interesting meeting, to say the least. Also, I attended an Eagle Scout presentation December 30th, and it's kind of interesting. It was at 7 o'clock at night, and I'm home, and I'm thinking, am I supposed to be somewhere? Let's see. So fortunately, I drove really quickly, and I got there in plenty of time, and was able to present that as well, too. I want to thank all the council members for helping me out this December for all these presentations and things that we all spend a lot of time in the community. I appreciate all of you helping me with that in December. As you know, I'm in retail, and that's an extremely busy month, so I just appreciate all of you stepping up and helping me out. Okay, so with that, we are at 6. We are going to recess now for, I believe, a study session and a closed session if time permits.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so with that, we will recess till 7:30. Thank you all. Okay, I'd like to reconvene our City Council meeting and let the record reflect that all council members are present. And I would like to ask Ms. Santangelo if she would please lead us in a flag salute.
Hand over heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. Any amendments to this agenda?
No amendments, Mayor.
Okay, we don't have any presentations or public information. We get down to public comments. I do have 2 cards. I'll call you up as they were submitted to me. First is a Mr. Bill Tabor, I believe. Is Bill here? Thank you, Bill. Let me explain. I think a lot of us know this, but if you could keep your comments to 3 minutes, Bill.
Got it.
Really appreciate that.
I have some handouts that are just talking points that I think might be helpful to the staff because my issue is a little complicated.
Okay.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, we'll start you right now. Thank you.
Okay. I'm here to talk about the fee for home occupancy permit applicable to a business associated with the work that my wife performs. At best, we judge that the need for an occupational permit is complicated, and it may become apparent that it would be potentially illegal for Dr. De Silva Curiel, my wife, to provide veterinary services from her home. Siberian Vision is our corporation. It's a California Chapter C corporation. It's no longer a service-oriented company as it was doing business here in the city as Animal Eye Clinic from 1993 to 2017. Dr. De Silva is the president of Siberian Vision. She is licensed as a California veterinarian. She also holds a specialty credential from the American College of Veterinary Ophthalmologists. Siberian Vision no longer holds a veterinary premises permit from the State of California Veterinary Medical Board. The doctor has been requested to contract to the Veterinary Ophthalmology Consulting on site at University of Saskatchewan in Canada, where she is tonight and the rest of the month. The doctor does not maintain an office nor conduct consulting services at home in Camarillo. She does not maintain a library, a desk, or reference materials. She has no consulting conference calls, etc. There is no business actually performed at her home. She is paid for the services where she goes. Those locations will never be in the city of Camarillo. There are no veterinary ophthalmology clinics in the county of Ventura any longer. Our business property is stored pending sale or disposal. Patient medical and business records are in commercial storage, pending legally permitted destruction. The address of Siberian Vision is a home address due to state requirements. The address is also used for corporate tax filings. The one fee suits all of $311 for a home occupancy permit may be appropriate for the businesses with offices at home, but is clearly an excessive fee for businesses that are outside consulting businesses that exist only outside of the residential address. I suggest we ask for your consideration that there be no fee charged or a $25 nominal fee, for instance, since our business is there's no need to engage code compliance personnel to do a field visit to the home. By the way, I was contacted today to arrange a home visit by a code compliance person. That's how she signed her email. That's my pitch.
Okay. It's not on the agenda, but I think you understand, yeah, but I'm certainly that staff will be, taking this under. You have, okay.
I've been at City Hall, talked with a lot of people about this.
Okay.
My contention is that there's lots of businesses for which code compliance is an issue. In this case, I filled out the permit request, I paid the $311, and I noted that there's no business hours, there's no business days of the week, and the only thing that's going on here, we use our home address because the law requires it to reflect our home address for two things, the corporation and tax filing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Okay, next is Matt Lorimer. And Matt, I know you know the drill. It's the 3 minute, and please, if you could keep that, I appreciate it.
I'm an expert at 3 minutes. I always follow the rules.
Thank you, Matt.
Tonight, I have a word for you as a city council and the people. It's called response time. Why does the fire department have so many firehouses in a community? And you're going, what am I talking about? Well, let me lead into that. Before I entered this beautiful city with my wife, I used to live in Thousand Oaks. If you remember last year, the borderline shootings, very, very tragic. I went to that site and I ran into people I haven't seen for years, and it was really sad. One thing we need to do in life is learn when things happen to communities. The safest city, who would have thought a shooting would have happened in Thousand Oaks? Tonight, I'm going to make a recommendation. That city, basically, when that event went down, you had one sheriff and you had 2 CHP show up. Response time. Response time. You know, the service calls we have in Camarillo are at Casa Pacifica, the Factory Outlet Mall. Why was the firehouse in Old Town put there? Because of response time. Because there was a time and need to cover an area when there was response. Tonight, I'm asking that firehouse be restored and it become a second police substation. I've said this in the past, but I can tell you right now, responders it's important. You have a college, you have multiple buildings going up, a Village of the Park, this side. It's time to think outside the box. What would you tell your family member or your neighbors if somebody lost their life? If we could improve the response time, that piece of property can make a difference. I think we shouldn't sell it. I think the police department should go in there. And you know what we need to do? The police officers knew what to do when they went in there. But what about the other people? Did they know where to duck or to go? We can make that second police station a place of learning for schools, a college, to educate people on what would happen. Nobody can guarantee safety in America today. When one of the largest cities in Ventura County, the world changed for children, for an officer who lost their life. I love this community. I have no motives. I don't want anything. I want to do what's right. And I think that fire station should be turned into a police substation. I talked about it many years ago. But life changed in the city of Thousand Oaks, folks. Tonight, when you go to bed and you look in the mirror, ask yourself if we could make a difference in this community by having a second police substation and having a place and the response time could make a difference and save a life, would you not do it? Would you not consider it? I hope to God you'll think about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. All right, I don't have any more blue cards. Would anybody else like to address the council on a non-agenda item? Okay, so seeing no one come forward, this will be a public hearing, and it's an annexing number 10 to the West Camarillo Community Facilities District. And I have a couple of comments here. This is the time and the place for the public hearing for the proposed annexation number 10 to the West Camarillo Community Facilities District number 1, the CFD, including the proposed levy of special taxes and all other matters discussed in the resolution of intention adopted on November 28, 2018. We will receive comments and questions and any oral protests from any interested persons. When all the comments have been received, the hearing will be closed. Refer to the city clerk.
Notice of public hearing was given and the affidavit attesting to publication of such notice is on file in the city clerk's office.
Okay, so with that, I am going to open the public hearing. And the public hearing is hereby opened. If anyone in the audience wishes to speak on this matter, please
Mayor,
come forward to the podium and state your name and the city of residence.
Mayor Kildee, first our
I'm sorry, I didn't see you there.
consultant's going to give up.
That's good, kind. You have some comments first.
Thank you. My name is Mary Ann Goodkind. I'm with the Norton Rose Fulbright. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on the Community Facilities District. It was formed by the city in 1990 to provide sewer drainage and bridge facilities. It was determined that only properties that were ready to develop would be included in the CFD. And therefore, we've had several annexations over the years. Back in 1998, we designated future annexation area. That allowed for a streamlined annexation process that did not include a public hearing. Today, we have the hotel site property to be annexed to the CFD. It was not within the future annexation area, therefore, we're going through a rather elaborate process with ballots and an election today. The process today would be, well, let me back up. The sewer facilities and bonds have already been retired. The city has minimized the amount of improvements to be built. They have been built through issuance of bonds. The only bonds that are left are drainage bonds. So we're looking at facilities that benefit from drainage facilities. The process today would be that we have a public hearing, that we pause so that the election official, your city clerk, can tabulate the ballots, open the ballots and tabulate them. Then if the election is in favor, there are 2 more resolutions for you to approve. So if you have any questions on the process or the subject matter, I'm happy to answer them.
Anyone have any questions, Ms. Goodkind, or any other staff member at this time? Okay, thank you. So with that, I'm going to open the public hearing, and I'm going to, is open. If anybody in the audience wishes to speak on this matter, please come forward to the podium, state your name and the city of residence for the record. Is anybody coming forward? I do not see anybody coming forward. So I will close this public hearing. Any questions or any discussions from the members of the City Council? Any questions or any discussions? All right, so I believe we need to have a motion to adopt the following resolution first. Is that correct? Yes. Okay.
So the first
anybody
motion
like to
should
do
be
that?
for recommendation number 1.
Mm-hmm.
I'll move to adopt a resolution determining the validity of prior proceedings and calling a special election related to annexation number 10.
Any further discussion? Please vote. Okay, that passes unanimously. So with that, we'll pause for a break for the holding of the election. Okay, are you ready? At this time, I'll ask the city clerk to open the ballots and announce the results of the election.
We did receive 2 ballots, and both ballots were affirmative votes.
I'll move to adopt a resolution canvassing the results of the election held within annexation number 10 of the West Camarillo Community Facilities District number 1.
Second. There's a motion and a second. If there's any further discussion on this? Hearing none, please vote. That passes unanimously.
I'll move to adopt a resolution annexing annexation number 10 to the West Camarillo Community Facilities District number 1, authorizing the levy of a special tax within annexation number 10 and approving certain related actions.
Second. There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. And that passes unanimously as well.
Let me just make a comment. I remember the night we set up this district. It was a Mello-Roos district for Spanish Hills, and we had about this many documents related to it. No kidding. There were 3 piles of those documents. I had bright red hair, and Mary Ann had long red pigtails.
All right. Okay, so with that, that's going to get us down to the departmental. It's the California Voting Rights Act. And at this particular time, I will ask for a staff report on this. This be
The That'll be me.
Mr. Derrick, would you take
Right.
this one? Thank you.
So as you've indicated, Mayor, we will be discussing tonight the California Voting Rights Act. The city received a letter from Kevin Shankman. The date of the letter was August 27th of 2018. It was received by the city on August 29th of 2018. In the letter, Mr. Shankman asserted that voting within Camarillo is racially polarized, which results in minority vote dilution, and therefore Camarillo's at-large elections violated the California Voting Rights Act of 2001. Mr. Shankman urges the city to change its at-large system of electing city council members. So as you know, currently the city has an at-large system, which means that council members can reside anywhere in the city and run for office. You alternate with every other election between either electing 2 council members or 3 council members. In 2018, our most recent election, we had 3 council members elected, and so on, and that's been the history of the city in the past. We have not had a requirement that the council members live within a specific district. So California Voting Rights Act 14, the California Voting Rights Act is found in the Elections Code. The references that you're going to see here when I refer to section, that's the Elections Code. And there's going to be several slides here where I go through the provisions of the California Voting Rights Act, which I think is important for the public to be aware of in terms of what the provisions are in what we call the CVRA. We start with section 14027, and that provides that an at-large method of election may not be imposed or applied in a manner that impairs the ability of a protected class to elect candidates of its choice or its ability to influence the outcome of an election as a result of the dilution or the abridgment of the rights of voters who are members of a protected class as defined pursuant to section 14026. The next section I'll draw your attention to is section 14028. This section provides that a violation of section 14027 is established if it is shown that racially polarized voting occurs in elections for members of the governing body of the political subdivision or in elections incorporating other electoral choices by the voters of the political subdivision. Elections conducted prior to the filing of an action pursuant to section 14027 and this section are more probative to establish the existence of racially polarized voting than elections conducted after the filing of the election. Further on section 14028, this is B. The occurrence of racially polarized voting shall be determined from examining results of elections in which at least one candidate is a member of a protected class or elections involving ballot measures or other electoral choices that affect the rights and privileges of members of a protected class. Further on section 14028. One circumstance that may be considered in determining a violation of section 14027 and this section is the extent to which candidates who are members of a protected class and who are preferred by voters of the protected class as determined by an analysis of voting behavior, have been elected to the governing body of a political subdivision that is the subject of an action based on section 14027 and this section. Still on 14028. In multi-seat at-large election districts where the number of candidates who are members of a protected class is fewer than the number of seats available, the relative group-wide support received by candidates from members of a protected class shall be the basis for racial polarization analysis. Still on 14028, as you can see, it's a very long section. We're now up to subsection C. The fact that members of a protected class are not geographically compact or concentrated may not preclude a finding of racially polarized voting or a violation of section 14027 and this section, but may be a factor in determining an appropriate remedy. Section D. Proof of an intent on the part of the voters or elected officials to discriminate against a protected class is not required. Subsection E, this is a little bit longer, so the font's a little smaller. Hopefully you can all read it, but I'll help you. The first factor that's listed here is these are other factors to consider besides the ones we've already looked at. 1 is the history of discrimination. 2, the use of electoral devices or other voting practices or procedures that may enhance the dilutive effects of at-large elections. 3, denial of access to those processes determining which groups of candidates will receive financial or other support in a given election. 4, the extent to which members of a protected class bear the effects of past discrimination in areas such as education, employment, health, which hinder their ability to participate effectively in the political process. And 5, the use of overt or subtle racial appeals in political campaigns are probative, but are not necessary factors to establish a violation of Section 14027 and this section. This is Section 14026E. Racially polarized voting means voting in which there is a difference, as defined in case law, regarding enforcement of the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965, and citations there, in the choice of candidates or other electoral choices that are preferred by voters in a protected class, and in the choice of candidates and electoral choices that are preferred by voters in the rest of the electorate. The methodologies for estimating group voting behavior as approved in applicable federal cases to enforce the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965, in the citation, to establish racially polarized voting may be used for purposes of this section to prove that elections are characterized by racially polarized voting. So that is the provision. Those are the provisions of the CVRA that I wanted to bring to your attention this evening. There's also an Elections Code section, which is section, I'll say 10010, which provides that if the agency adopts a resolution of intent to change to districts within 45 days of receipt of the demand letter, here it was received on August 29th of 18, and within 90 days after the notice of intent, adopts an ordinance changing to districts, then there is a cap of $30,000 on the attorney's fees that can be recovered. So the timeline that would have applied under that section to the city of Camarillo is what you see on this slide. So 45 days after August 9th would have been August 13th. Well, the council meeting before August 13th would have been the council meeting on October 10th. 90 days after October 10th was January 8th, which was the time limit under Section 10010 for the city to adopt an ordinance to change to districts. Well, January 8th was yesterday, so we would have had to back up from there. So the ordinance for the first reading would have had to have been on November 8th of 2018, and the second reading on December 5th of 2018. And as you all recall, December 5th was the date of the reorganization of the City Council and the swearing in of the council members elected on November 6th of 2018. I should mention that there was a typographical error in the agenda report at one point where I indicated the election was on November 8th. It was on November 6th. So as you all know, we have 2 new members on the council that were elected at the November 2018 election. So there have been communications with Mr. Shankman, the attorney that sent this letter. We had received the demand letter on August 29th. On August 11th, I wrote a letter to Mr. Shankman. I requested an extension on the time limits to January for us to adopt the notice of intent, and July to adopt the ordinance approving district maps. Now let me digress from the slide for just a moment. The decision of the City Council this evening on whether or not to change to districts or not is one of the most important, if not the most important decision the City Council will ever make. You would be deciding, if you switch to districts, to change the method by which City Council members are elected. It is a very significant decision, and it is one that should be made with the proper amount of time and effort to review it, which is why we requested the additional time from Mr. Shankman. So on October 22nd of 2018, I get an email from Mr. Shankman. He rejects our request for an extension of time. He doesn't suggest any alternative times. And then on November 1, after a phone call from Andrea Alicorn, who works with Mr. Shankman, they said they would only agree to November 14th for the time for the city to adopt the notice. That was 8 days after the November 6th election. It was before the new council was seated, so that was their timeline on when they wanted that notice to be adopted, without giving this council, as presently constituted, the opportunity to weigh in on whether or not to adopt a resolution. So November 8th, I sent a letter to Mr. Shankman. I said, well, we'll move up the January 23rd date, which is what we had originally proposed, to January 9th for the council to take this action, and then we'll adopt our maps by July of 2019 if the council elects to go this way. Now, I should pause again to make this point. The fact of the matter is that nothing that was happening with regards to Mr. Shankman was going to impact the November 2018 election. We are talking about the November 2020 election. So the fact that we would be making a decision on this tonight for the resolution of intent and adopting and then drawing up maps and adopting an ordinance to approve the maps by July of 2019 would be plenty of time in advance of the 2020 election. I pointed that out to Mr. Shankman in my letter, of course. Then on November 14th, I presented to the City Council an agenda report with regards to the CVRA, and the direction from the council at that time was to come back to the council on July 9th, 2019 regarding the results of my research on the applicable law of the Voting Rights Act and the options that are available to the city. On December 5th of 2018, as I mentioned earlier, we had our 3 council members elected, sworn in, Charlotte Craven, Sean Mulchay, and Susan Santangelo. On December 14th, I sent an email to Mr. Shankman. Since his original letter didn't present evidence in support of the claims he was making in the letter, I sent him an email, and in my email I pointed out that I was asking that he provide us with the evidence in support of those allegations in his letter, that the voting in Camarillo was racially polarized, that it resulted in minority vote dilution, and his other allegations. I requested that evidence so that it could be considered in this agenda report, which I am preparing for you tonight. Mr. Shankman did not provide us with the evidence. Instead, he filed a lawsuit, and he did that on Christmas Eve, which, besides being the day before Christmas, it's also my birthday. And what he did was he files this complaint with the court. It is exhibit, too much lawyering here. It is attached to your agenda packet and as attachment 8. And the plaintiff in that case is the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, who he had said he was writing that letter from August on, and the defendant is the city. The complaint and summons were served on the city on December 26th of 2018, and our responsive pleading to that complaint is due on January 25th of 2019. All right. Now, let's talk about the history of the California Voting Rights Act and challenge letters, which is what this letter from Mr. Shankman is. So over the past 2 years, over 40 California cities that had conducted their city council elections by means of an at-large election, such as you have in Camarillo, have received letters threatening to sue their city for alleged violations of the CVRA unless those cities voluntarily transition to a district-based system. I should mention that previously I went through the statute that was in the CVRA and the Elections Code sections. Statutes are often interpreted by the courts of appeal to provide guidance as to what the meaning is of that statute. They interpret the statute, and when those courts make decisions, they serve as legal precedent that can then be used by parties to determine what their rights and obligations are under statutes. Well, with the CVRA, there have only been 3 Court of Appeal decisions that have been made by the courts. They are the Sanchez case, the Ray case, and the Jiraki case. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. Let's talk about the Sanchez case. In the Sanchez case, the trial court granted the city's motion for judgment on the pleadings, ruling that the CVRA was facially invalid under state and federal constitutions. What a facially invalid challenge means is that you just look at the statute, you don't look at the facts, and you just read the statute and say whether reading it on its face it is unconstitutional. The trial court in Sanchez thought that it was. The Court of Appeal reversed that decision in Sanchez, and they remanded the case back to the trial court for further proceedings, which is common if there's been a decision such as there was here. It wasn't a trial with a final judgment. This was a motion for judgment on the pleadings. And I know I'm getting kind of legalese here, but at that point, there still needed to be further proceedings to resolve the case, which is why the Court of Appeal sent it back to the trial court. All right, still on the Sanchez case. What Sanchez says, and I've had a copy of the Sanchez case in your agenda packet, is attachment number 10. And Sanchez says in the case that they did not decide a number of issues, and there's 4 issues here. Number 1, which is fairly important, what elements must be proved to establish liability under the CVRA? 2, is the court precluded from employing crossover or coalition districts, i.e. districts in which plaintiff's protected class does not comprise a majority of voters, as a remedy? 3, is the court precluded from employing any alternative at-large voting system as a remedy? And 4, does the particular remedy under contemplation by the court, if any, conform to the Supreme Court's dilution remedy cases? Now, when the case was remanded back to the trial court, it's my understanding that the case was settled. There was no decision by the trial court with regard to all of these issues that had been left undecided by the Court of Appeal, and significantly, number 1, the elements that must be proved to establish liability. This is the Ray case. This is the second one. Ray versus Madera Unified School District. Here, the Court of Appeal affirmed rulings by the trial court in regard to attorney's fees as awarded that against the district and against granting summary judgment in favor of a county committee. As in the Sanchez case, the court in Ray does not address what the issue of what elements must be proved to establish liability under the CVRA. Here's the Palmdale case. The first amended complaint of the plaintiff alleges, quote, despite a Latino population of approximately 54.4% and an African American population of 14.8% in the city of Palmdale, no African American has ever been elected to defendant city council. Only 1 Latino has been elected to defendant city council, and no candidate of choice of Latino or African American voters has been elected to the defendant city council in the last 10 years. That was the allegation in that case. Here's what happened in the Court of Appeal, and preceding that with the trial court. The trial court ruled that the city was in violation of the CVRA. It rejected the city's argument that as a charter city it could not be subject to the CVRA, and issued a preliminary injunction prohibiting the city from certifying the results of the election. That decision by the trial court was affirmed by the Court of Appeal. As in the Sanchez case and the Palmdale case, the Sanchez case and the Ray case, the court in the Palmdale case also does not address the issue of what elements must be proved to establish liability under the CVRA. Now, there's some trial court cases that are going on out there that I've looked at that I wanted to bring to your attention. One of them is the Pico Rivera Association, which we've abbreviated PNA, versus the City of Santa Monica. And in this case, the PNA alleged that the city was in violation of the CVRA and the Equal Protection Clause of the California Constitution. The trial court has ruled in favor, this is in Los Angeles, the trial court has ruled in favor of the PNA on both of these causes of action. There were some allegations in that Santa Monica case that I want to mention to you. The PNA alleged, among other things, that instead of the district-based elections previously employed in Santa Monica, that there was a charter provision adopted in 1946 which established at-large. So the city was district, and then in 1946 went to at-large. PNA also alleges that the proponents of the at-large elections in 46 proclaimed their racially discriminatory motives, which is followed by additional allegations regarding the adoption of the at-large system. So that's all part of the First Amended complaint. Continuing with the Santa Monica case. In addition to what the events were in 1946 in Santa Monica, the PNA also alleged that in 1990 that the Santa Monica established a charter review commission which recommended that the city institute by-district elections, but that the city council in July of 92 rejected any change to the at-large system. On January 2nd of 2019, Judge Palazuelos ordered that all future city council elections be district-based in accordance with a map proposed by PNA. So the judge had ruled on a tentative ruling in favor of the plaintiffs in that case on both the CVRA and the equal protection, and subsequently to that tentative ruling, she also issued this order. And it's my understanding that there's something that's called a statement of decision that's been submitted to the court that's being reviewed and is going to be subject to some further activity in that case until that final statement of decision is issued by the court. It hasn't been issued yet. And thereafter, a judgment would be entered. After the judgment is entered, we have understood that it's been publicly stated that the city would be filing an appeal of that expected judgment. So that was a case that recently, as you can see, at the trial court level was proceeded as I've described it to you. There's another case out of the city of Poway. That's in the federal court, and it's at the trial court level as well. Here, the city received one of those demand letters from an attorney, and the city changed from at-large to district elections following receipt of that letter. The complaint, which is filed by the plaintiff, alleges that the districts created by that ordinance is traceable to the CVRA's requirement that the city engage in racial gerrymandering, where race is used as the primary criteria for establishing the district. The complaint alleges that this action is brought to vindicate his constitutional rights under the 14th Amendment to the United States, and that is still pending at the trial court level. Okay, now I want to get into a little information about the city of Camarillo in terms of its population, number of registered voters, et cetera. So our population based on the 2010 census was 65,201. The number of registered voters as of 2016 is 41,343. In 2018, it went up to 42,186. The number of Latinos in the 2010 census in Camarillo, 14,958. The number of Latino registered voters as of 2016 was 6,931. We don't have that information yet available for 2018. The Latino percentage of the population of Camarillo is approximately 23%. The total eligible voters in Camarillo, the estimate is 49,000. And the total number of Latino eligible voters, again an estimate, is 9,673, which is about 19.7% of the total number of registered voters. Okay, now I'm moving on to the options that are available to the City Council if the Council wishes to proceed to districts. I should tell you that to kind of fast forward to the suggested action. The suggested action is that we receive direction from the Council tonight as to, one, whether you're going to adopt a resolution of intent, which is attachment 17 in the packet, or two, make a motion not to proceed to districts. So what I'm talking about now is the options of if the City Council makes the decision to change to districts. What would that look like? A, that the council may select the number of council members and whether the mayor is directly elected. So, as I explained in the agenda report, Camarillo does not have a directly elected mayor now. You appoint your mayor based on the decision of the entire council. Some cities have an elected mayor, and there would be an at-large election for the entire city. And then they could either serve a 2-year term as mayor or a 4-year term. And in terms of the number of council members, under the code, if you have, let's assume you don't have an elected mayor for the purposes of my next comment, you could either have 5 districts, 7 districts, or 9 districts. Now, if you chose to go with an elected mayor, that's going to change your number of districts. So if you're going to have an elected mayor with the minimum number of council members, you would have an elected mayor and 4 districts. If you're going to have 7 districts, you would have an elected mayor and 6 districts. And if you're going to have 9, you'd have an elected mayor and 8 districts. Okay, so that's what A is about. B, to create the district, there's at least 5 public hearings that are required. 2 of them are required for public input. 2 of them are to create the map, and then a final hearing to introduce the ordinance. And the fact is that based on our review, we might need some additional public hearings for purposes of even further outreach. If following the first 2 hearings, we need some additional input from the demographer. We would be recommending, as it is in the resolution, that if the city is going to go with districts, is that a demographer be hired by the city and entered into a contract to assist with this process, to assist with the first 2 for the public input, to be available to answer questions that the public might have about districts, and so the demographer can hear the input from the public at those hearings. And then possibly a public hearing right in here before we start the mapping, where the demographer would have an opportunity to kind of summarize what he heard and present further information that would be relevant to how he's going to proceed or what his or her intended method of operation would be. We would need 2 public hearings. This is required by statute to create the maps. I'm going to recommend that, as you know, with a ordinance, you can have, well, you do have 2 readings. You have a first reading where it's introduced and a second reading where it's adopted. My advice to you is that we have a public hearing for both the first reading and the second reading, because there's an ambiguity in the CVRA as to which of those 2 steps the public hearing should take place. So that's item B. C is cumulative voting. Now, cumulative voting is discussed in the agenda report, and let me just summarize it by saying this. If you have, for example, 3 seats that are up for election, we're using the at-large system now, and you have 3 seats that are up for election. That would mean that each voter would get 3 votes, and they could take those votes and put them all on one candidate, or put 2 on one candidate and 1 on another candidate, or spread them 1 vote on each of the 3 of the candidates of their choice. That's what cumulative voting is. There are some cities in this country that have cumulative voting. None of them are in California. And as a matter of fact, there is a case out of Los Angeles called the case of Solis versus the city of Santa Clarita. And in that case, the issue was whether or not, pursuant to a settlement of a CVRA case, a city could use cumulative voting as a method of increasing the minority voting strength as an alternative to districts. Well, the Secretary of State issued a letter to the judge at that time, which indicated that, quote, I have been unable to identify any express statutory authority for the use of cumulative voting in California by a general law city. And the result was that the judge in that case, Judge Green, issued an order finding that cumulative voting would not be legal in California. So while when we look at options to districts, cumulative voting has been a subject of discussion, it still hasn't been accepted in California. There's no statute that authorizes it. The Secretary of State has indicated that it's not one that they found any authority for. And as a matter of fact, we've checked with the County of Ventura and their voting machinery, and they have told us that their voting machinery would not accommodate a cumulative voting type of voting method. So there's several reasons why cumulative voting would not work as an alternative to districts, namely that there's no statutory authority for it, and because of the machinery issue with the County of Ventura. Continuing under the discussion with regards to what it would look like if we changed to districts. Under district-based elections, the council can choose the election sequence in the future districts, but there's some ground rules. One is that the proposed election sequence must be specified for the district plan, that no term of office may be cut short. 3, that the city council may consider the expiration of terms of office in setting the election rotation. 4, in determining the final sequence of the district elections, the council is required to give special consideration to the purposes of the CVRA. And 5, that preferences of voters in the districts shall be taken into account. Now, the rules with regard to district maps.
Could you explain that last one?
I'm sorry?
On the last slide, could you explain number 5?
Yeah, perfect.
What does that mean?
Well, remember that this is with regards to the district-based elections, and that you have to comply with these rules. Number 5 is preference of the voters taking into account. There will be, as I mentioned before, 2 public hearings which are devoted towards public input with regard to districts. So the demographer will be able to explain in more detail than me, because this is all he does every day, all day long, or she, to explain how those preferences would be taken into account in connection with the drawing of the map, the district map.
Well, I guess I'm puzzled because it says voters. It doesn't say people who show up at the public hearings. So
Well,
to me, the voters' preferences would have been in the past, and I'm having a hard time getting my hands wrapped around this.
Understood. And to the extent that some further research is needed on that, that would be something that we'd put in the hands of the demographer. That's why demographers do what they do, which is to assist the city with respect to the process of changing from at-large to districts.
Boy.
Go ahead.
I think part of the confusion, Mr. Pirrig, is this is contextually within a section of your staff report that talks about discretion in deciding election sequencing. And so from a contextual standpoint, that's what I think makes it confusing. Not that the preferences of voters in the districts, it's not clear whether you mean preferences of voters in the district. It's not clear to me whether you mean preferences of voters in the districts should be taken into account, whether that refers to different maps or specific areas of districts, or whether it refers to election sequencing.
That is a good point, and it's something that I would defer to the demographer on as to what extent it would apply to both sequencing and to the maps.
Right. I guess the other point is the law is not clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. The rules with regard to the district maps, there would be, as I've mentioned in my comments, a demographer that would be, if you're going to move to districts, that would be retained to assist the city with this process. Some of the rules that apply with regards to the maps is that each council district shall contain a nearly equal population. Secondly, that the district plan shall be drawn in a manner that complies with the Federal Voting Rights Act, including compactness, regularity, and other factors. And 3, that each council district shall not be drawn with race as the predominant factor. There are additional criteria that have been used by various communities. That includes topographical and geographical boundaries or landmarks, major roads, freeways, creeks, railroad lines, or other features, and communities of interest, school district boundaries, neighborhood boundaries, retail, commercial districts, voting precincts, and others, and avoiding creating contests between incumbents to the extent reasonably possible. Now, with regard to a comparison of the at-large system and the district-based system, I should mention initially that depending upon the facts in any given city, that district elections may allow voters in a protected class to elect candidates of their choice or to influence the outcome of an election. And as I said, that's depending on the facts in a given city. This chart goes through the comparison between the at-large, which is what we have now, and the district system. The first comparison is that all 5 members of the city council members respond to the electorate of the entire city. In comparison with the district, a single council member answers only to the district electorate. Secondly, 3 council members are elected under the at-large system. 3 council members are elected, and 2 years later, 2 council members are elected, which gives all the voters the power to elect 5 council members in a 4-year period. Compare that with a district election where the voters in the district will vote once every 4 years for 1 council member. 3, all city voters have the power to vote on changing the majority of the city council, which is significant in that council actions require a majority vote of the council. Comparing with district voters are unable to elect the majority of a council. They can only elect the council member that is from their district. 4, with at-large again. City council members can maintain a citywide view of the issues. With a district, city council members may be inclined to represent interests of a particular geographic region of the city. 5, with at-large. That can result in a council member whose residences are concentrated in particular neighborhoods of the city, whereas with districts, the council members will reside within their district. 6, it is more costly to run for a citywide election, whereas in a district election it is less expensive. 7, candidates for the city council can reside anywhere in the city, whereas with districts, the candidate for the city council must reside in that district. Number 8, that the best qualified candidates can be elected regardless of where they live. And with a district, one of the best qualified candidates may not reside in the district. 9, voters will be voting every 2 years, and the ballot may include citywide measures. With districts, there's a potential for lower turnout for a citywide measure that does not include the election of a council member. 10, for purposes of contacting city council member for assistance, the voter does not have one person to contact, whereas with districts, each voter has a specific council member to contact for assistance. They're not limited to that council member. They could certainly reach out to others, but they do have the one that was elected from their district if they choose to reach out to that council member. Number 11, there's no maps are required to be drawn because the candidates are elected citywide. With district maps, they must be redrawn every 10 years following review of census results. So with respect to the 2020 election, that would be drawn sometime, those maps would be drawn in 2019. After the 2020 election, then there would be the 2020 census. So then for the maps for the 2022 election, there would be a need to redraw the maps to be consistent with the results of the census that came out in 2020. The costs that would be incurred in CVRA litigation. I will point out, first of all, that the costs to defend against the CVRA lawsuit can be $1 million or more. It is impossible to predict with accuracy what the cost to the city would be to defend the CVRA lawsuits, the lawsuit that's been filed against the city, primarily because it is not known to what extent the litigation would proceed. It could be much more than $1 million. If a plaintiff, and that is depending upon, of course, whether you choose to go to districts or to litigate. If the decision is to go to districts, my anticipation is that the cost to defend against the current lawsuit is certainly going to be less, should be less than $1 million. Of course, you never know what a plaintiff is going to do. If a plaintiff is successful, so that's if you win, you're going to incur defense costs. If you lose and the plaintiff wins, then they are entitled to recover their attorney's fees and costs and other litigation expenses. And we have a chart in the agenda report that lists what the some of these cases of cost various cities. This is attachment 16. It appears at page 169 of the agenda report. The columns there include a column with the name of the city or other political subdivision, the date of the settlement condition, the attorney's fees. You can see the city of Palmdale paid $4.5 million. These are the attorney's fees that were recovered by the attorneys for the plaintiff. $4.5 million in the Palmdale case, $3 million in Modesto. Madera was $162,000. Compton's wasn't disclosed. Tulare was $500,000. Hanford Unified School District, $110,000. I'm not covering them all here, but to give you an idea. San Mateo County was $650,000. City of Anaheim was $1.2 million. Highland was $1.3 million. Whittier, $1 million. Santa Clara Community College District, $850,000. And then, as you go through this and see some of the later amounts, like, for example, beginning on page 173 of your packet, you'll see a number of them were less than $30,000. Those are cities that made the decision to adopt their resolution of intent within 45 days and then their change to districts within 90 days. So, as I've said a couple of times already this evening, the suggested actions for the council tonight are, number one, to adopt a resolution declaring the city's intent to transition from at-large to districts-based elections pursuant to Evidence Code Section 1010. That Section A is the one that tells us how we change to districts. Remember, I talked about the 2 public hearings for public input, the maps being prepared, and then the hearings on the maps themselves, and then the ordinance. That is the process that's set forth in this election code section. And further, to direct the city manager to take appropriate action to implement the resolution. That's one choice. Another choice would be a motion that the city not change to district-based elections. And finally, other action is determined appropriate by the city council. I'm not quite sure what that action would be, but I've left it open as a placeholder in case, there is something else you want to talk about as other choices. With regard to the lawsuit that's been filed by Mr. Shankman, there will be a need to file a responsive pleading to that complaint regardless of what action the council takes tonight. That's due on January 25th, so we would be proceeding to defend that case. If the city chooses to go to districts, that may have an impact in terms of what goes on with that. Well, would have an impact, in my opinion, on what the scope of that litigation would be. So that finishes my report. I'm prepared to respond to questions.
I know there's some questions, but I want to start it off. Mr. Pierik, on the suggested actions, how much detail do you need tonight? In other words, if we were to go with 1, how much detail would you need with that? Of 2, how much detail would we have to do with that? Or number 3, how much detail would we need to do tonight on either one of those 3 projected options?
Option 1 is the resolution, and it is in your agenda packet at big page 176. It is attachment 17. So in the resolution, we include various what we call recitals that go through the fact that the demand letter has been received, that the government code authorizes the city to adopt an ordinance to change to districts and the other recitals in there. And then Section 3 is the one where the council resolves pursuant to Elections Code 10010 to change to districts. Section 4 is that the staff is to propose an estimated time frame and a hearing schedule for the adoption of the district-based elections with an intended completion date no later than July 24 of 2019. So we would come back to you at a future meeting with a timetable that would include dates for the various public hearings that I described to you that would be needed if you change to districts. Section 5 is that the city shall retain a qualified demographic consultant to assist with establishing a district-based electoral system. And as you recall, I made reference to that in my report this evening about the need to hire a demographer to assist the city with this process. And then Section 6, after we've had the hearings, the demographic consultant is then authorized to, city manager is authorized to formulate one of the electoral district scenarios for the public and the council to review at those 2 hearings. And we also add that the public hearings are all going to be noticed on the city's website at least 10 calendar days in advance of the hearing. In addition to that, notice of the public hearing will be published in the newspaper. And finally, that the city manager would be authorized to take any and all necessary actions to give effect to this resolution.
At what point do we decide about elected mayor and how many districts?
That is during the course of your review of the district and the discussion of whether or not it could be a subject of discussion at all the public hearings. So that could include the very first public hearing where you could have a discussion about whether or not you wanted to have an elected mayor or not and seek public input as well. Because, and I'm glad you asked that question, you can't prepare the maps until you know which way you're going to go. If you're going to have an elected mayor, that's going to determine what your map's going to look like, because in my example with 5, if you have an elected mayor, you only got 4 districts. So if you don't have an elected mayor, you got 5. So your maps will be different. So
You said 4, 6, or 8. At some point, we have to decide on the number, if we go with number 1, and the number of districts, whichever way we go.
Yeah, but you don't need to decide that tonight.
Okay.
That's not a tonight decision. That would be a decision that would be made on a going forward basis, and seeking public input at the first 2 public hearings on that subject as well, and also input from the demographer and whoever else has the information to provide to you. But that's not a tonight decision.
And just one real quick follow-up. The demographer is, for the most part, a statistic gatherer? Is that
Well, they're a little more than that. What the demographers from my understanding of how the demographer works, is that they assist not only just in doing the statistical analysis, but they are also familiar with the procedures in moving to districts. So some of those are legal and some of those are demographic. They kind of blend between the 2. But we would hopefully be coming back to you with a recommendation on a demographer who's done this many times and is very familiar with the process and who has a good reputation for being well qualified to do that. So it would be someone who not only does the statistical analysis, checking the populations, et cetera, but also to assist with the steps that are needed to get you from point A to point to the end.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
I don't know if I answered your question about option 2. I gave you the details on option 1, which is the resolution. Option 2 is the motion that you don't change to districts, in which case we're going to proceed with the litigation with option 1 or 2, but with option 2, the likelihood is that the litigation is going to be much more protracted and meaning more expensive than if the council switches to districts. I believe that the litigation would be much less costly.
And if we, with suggestion action 2, who selects the dates on that?
Who selects what?
The dates.
The
Let's
dates?
say if we go to trial, does the city have anything to say about the date?
Well, actually, the court is the one that actually sets the date, but obviously the judge, what would happen in the litigation is that there would be responsive pleadings filed, and depending upon whether we're proceeding under option 1 or 2 here, there may be some amount of discovery. Then once discovery is completed, and if there's pretrial motions, and then eventually the judge will ask the parties if they're ready for trial, and if they say yes, then the judge will pick a date that's convenient to their calendar and to the trial attorneys as well.
Any other questions?
I got some questions. Mr. Mayor.
Ms. O'Shea, why don't you start us off here?
The plaintiff attorney, the attorney that filed the demand letter and now the lawsuit, he resides in Malibu. Is that right?
I don't know where he resides.
His office does.
His office is in Malibu.
Has he served Malibu with a demand letter?
I don't know.
Okay. We are no longer protected under the safe harbor provisions.
That's right. The reason is that the council has taken the time to do the analysis instead of trying to rush through this very important, in my view, maybe the most important decision that this council will ever make. Instead of rushing it and trying to get it done in a short time frame, you recall during my presentation I went through the various states. Rather than rush it, we took the time that was necessary to do the review and analysis. So the answer is we did not meet the 45-day deadline. We did ask Mr. Shankman to extend it to the dates we said, January and July. For whatever reason, he chose not to do that.
And I'm coming in mid-game because this all started, we were all served before either Susan or I got elected. At what point was the original city council informed of the demand letter? And then can you spread any light? Did we choose to pursue this action at the direction of the city council then?
Well, let me say this. We've had closed sessions that I'm not at liberty to disclose, but I can tell you that the city council was made aware of the demand letter the day we got it.
Okay. That's all I have.
Anything else? Tony?
Mr. Perry, can you go back to the slide that deals with the council choosing the election sequencing? It's those 5 factors on election sequencing. And hypothetically, if the council were to adopt option 1, looking at element number 4, it says in determining the final sequence of the district elections, the council is required to give quote-unquote special consideration to the purposes of the CVRA. Could you enlighten us a little bit more on what that phrase means?
Well, I could say
Staff
that,
report covers it, but I think I'd like to hear you
I would
verbalize it.
say I would say that the purposes of the CVRA, and I'm going to need to turn to that, so give me a second.
And it's not an idle question because it's also set forth in the draft resolution under section I on page 177 of the staff report.
Well, I'm looking at the CVRA to see if it has in it a statement of purpose. And it does not, sometimes you will see that in the beginning of an act, and it's not stated in 14025 or 14026. So I guess at this point I would have to say that just looking at the code, I'm not seeing that it states a purpose. So there would likely be, I'm assuming, some statement in the case law that describes what the purpose is, and that I would have to research that to, if you choose to go to districts, I think that's something that I would want to get back to you on in a future council meeting to be able to elaborate on that.
Proceed, please.
Well, I'm a little concerned about that because that language, I understand the dilemma. I'm a little concerned, though, because there is language in the draft resolution, again, hypothetically, if the council were to go this route, that talks about special consideration, but I take it that that's a citation of Elections Code 10010B.
Yes.
But nobody knows what that means.
Well, somebody might, but I don't know.
Actually, maybe Legislative Council does, and the author of this of the CVRA, but there's nothing in case law. Am I correct?
Well, nothing that I can put my finger on right at the moment.
Okay. All right.
Thanks. Anything else?
No. Thank you.
Anything else with anybody? Ms. Santangelo?
I'm not sure if this is a question for our attorney or Mr. Norman, but could we discuss where the funds come from the city for litigation? Or
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the full question.
how we pay for litigation?
Oh, okay, yes. In a situation like this, these expenditures are not budgeted, so they would be appropriated from the city's undesignated fund balance, which was budgeted for this current fiscal year at approximately $10.3 million.
Anything else? Ms. Craven, do you have anything? Anything else with anybody? All right. So we've heard the report from our city attorney. You've also heard the questions that council has. So at this point, I do have some blue cards, so I'm going to call everybody up. And I think everybody knows pretty much, but if you could keep your comments to 3 minutes, it would be very helpful. And I'm going to call them up in the order that they were presented to me. And the first is Bev Drensel. Is Bev? Yeah, there's Bev. Welcome. And if you wouldn't mind putting the microphone down a little bit, Bev, so we can, thank you so much.
All right. First and foremost, I urge the council to move forward with districting. It is the only viable option, as attempting to fight the lawsuit has been fruitless, time-consuming, waste of money for other cities, most notably Santa Monica. Camarillo has many other projects that can be funded with the money that would be spent fighting this. For clarity and transparency, some of the questions the city attorney already answered, but currently, what happens if this goes over budget and how much has already been spent for the lawsuit? And on diversity, it includes socioeconomic statuses, different life experiences, a variety of professions, education, all aspects of life. It is beneficial to have the perspective of a renter, different generations, not only a business owner, but someone who works in retail. The last two elections demonstrate Camarillo's cry for reform by electing new members of the community and voting in term limits. With districting, it allows for each community to make sure their voices are heard. The concerns of Spanish Hills are different from those at Village at the Park. Actually living in those neighborhoods is vital because it provides an authentic voice. I am a Latina, and I only bring this up because somehow having the potential of being proud to be one of the first Latinas to represent Camarillo became an issue of identity politics. Representation matters, qualifications matter. Perhaps a coincidence, but looking at the 2018 results, all three candidates of Latinx descent are the candidates with the least number of votes. At no point should anyone in these chambers feel intimidated, unsafe, don't have a voice, or be accosted coming out of the bathroom. Some messages received while text banking for myself, Santangelo, and Romero verbatim in reply to, "Do we have your support?" First thing I want to know, are these people United States citizens? Fuck yeah, let's build that wall. How high do you think we can make that wall? I'd rather walk straight through the gates of hell than vote for any of them or the incumbents. Identity politics has no place in local or other political races. Only if she sucks my dick. I was actually thinking maybe you could self-mutilate. Your friends are welcome to join in on the fun. I'm a trumpeter now. Take a walk on the wild side. Fuck you. Las personas son la ciudad. The people are the city. A quote from actor John Leguizamo's required reading for America in The Atlantic resonates tremendously with Camarillo's time for districting. These facts are important because when Latinx kids don't see themselves represented on stage or film or television or newspapers or history textbooks, what they're told is, you don't matter. He said, but what they see themselves represented, they are told, you are important. You are authors. You are scientists. You are explorers. You are special. You are leaders. You are respected. You are the reason why we are here. Thank you for your consideration and time.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, next we've got Barbara Williams. Barbara's here. Again, Barbara, I know you know the drill here, but 3 minutes if you would be appreciative.
I am a fighter, and I expect you to fight for Camarillo. I am offended that Mr. Schenkman is insinuating that I and other Camarillo voters base our voting on race or color of skin when we vote based on qualifications. I can assure you I'm not a racist. I find this shakedown of Camarillo to be similar to the shakedown of businesses using the disguise of violations of the Persons with Disabilities Act. I feel they have not proven, quote, voting in Camarillo is racially charged, unquote. Mr. Pierik asked for evidence of the allegations in Mr. Schenkman's letter, and nothing was provided. I doubt there is evidence or citizens of Camarillo requested help. Camarillo has been put in the same box as other cities, but we're nothing like the other cities. There's no way to know how Latinos vote when our votes are protected by law. Our recent election disputes major issues raised. First, we had Latinos run, disputing, quote, the paucity of Latino candidates to seek election to the Camarillo City Council also reveals voter delusion, end quote, and proving there is nothing inhibiting Latinos from running. Second, 2 of the incumbents were not reelected. Therefore, the whole argument on incumbents goes away. Districts will divide our city as districts compete against each other for resources. Today, we are a cohesive city with all council members looking out for all of us, and districts will severely change the dynamics of our city. Districts don't help, they hurt our city. Could it be that Latinos had different priorities and choose not to run? And should the choice for districts be the voters' decision? Even if we had districts, Latinos might not run or get elected, wasting money transitioning to districts. Has anyone really looked deeply at the 22% of Latinos in Camarillo? If they're dispersed throughout the city, districts is not going to change a thing. And based on the DMV debacle, are all the Latino voters eligible? There have not been any efforts in Camarillo to prohibit Latinos from registering. Every Saturday at the farmers market before the election and during the fiesta, there was registering of people without intimidation or concern for race. The lawsuit threatens the city without providing substantiated proof. Low thresholds for violations of the California Voting Rights Act forces cities like Camarillo to implement districts because of the high cost of litigation. The cost of litigation may be lower when you consider the cost of public meetings and the cost of an election for districts. We should not give in to this extortion. Yes, extortion. I feel the city should challenge the CVRA because of the unreasonably low thresholds. Bottom line, this is a frivolous lawsuit, and fight it. Do the right thing for the city. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, next is Libby Higgins. Is Libby here? There she is. Again, Libby, if you could keep it to 3 minutes, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Libby Higgins. I am here in support of districting. I'm a little disappointed that we're having the conversation about districting while it's tied up in this lawsuit, because I think it's a good conversation to have. What is good for our city? Is it districting or is it at-large elections? And it would be nice if it wasn't tied up with a or else with the lawsuit. Unfortunately, it is that. We are in that situation. I'm a little bit I had planned statements, but I am very frustrated to hear that it wouldn't have affected the 2018 elections, or that this shouldn't have been brought up somehow, because I actually think, after hearing over and over again, that this might be the most important decision you make as a city council while you sit there for however long. This should have been what the 2018 election was all about. I shouldn't be sitting here wondering where you might stand. I should have known that absolutely where Susan stands, where Charlotte stands, where Sean stands, because you should have been campaigning on it. And the people that are sitting at the council right now who were here and found out this information in August and weren't loud and clear about the fact that this was coming down the pike literally minutes after people were elected in, I'm frustrated and hurt by that. I find that disingenuous as a leader. So, back to what I think about districting. Here's what I'll say. I think when it comes right down to it, districting is good for cities and good for local elections, namely because when you look at Tony Trembley's election in 2016, he knocked on, reportedly, about 5,000 doors and had a chance to interface with those people. Susan's election just very recently knocked on over 8,000 doors. Now, while those numbers are impressive, if we're looking at 21,000 doors in Camarillo, even Susan's number is not anything more than a little bit over a third of the city of Camarillo that she was able to have that one-on-one interface with during canvassing. In a district election, you have a lot more accessibility, a lot more accountability, and I think that's a great thing. I also want to say when it comes to the lawsuit and the idea of taking on this lawsuit, I want to know who wins. I want to know if we win this lawsuit and we become known as Camarillo, the city that took a stand against the Voting Rights Act. I want to know what that looks like in terms of our PR. I want to know what some kind of message that sends. I want to know that if you have $1 million to spend to stand up and say, you know what, somebody called us racist and we're not. I can give you a lot of ways to spend $1 million that shows that you're not racist, that isn't going to have anything to do with a lawsuit. So I'd really like you to consider not only is districting a good thing if we weren't having this discussion, if we weren't talking about the lawsuit or the ifs or the ultimatums, is districting maybe a good thing to take a look at and do anyway? But I also want you to look at really, how should we be spending our money? Is it declaring that we're not racist or leading and having good ideas?
Thank you for your comments. Okay, next we have Matt Lorimer. Matt, yeah, there's Matt. Again, Matt, 3 minutes, if you would, please. I know you know.
I know the rules.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motto in the city. You know what it's called? The people are the city. You know, I have a question for Kevin, Charlotte, Tony, and Brian Perrick. That question is very simple. The old guard wanted to stay in office. Sean and Susan weren't supposed to win. The Stars wrote them off in an article and saying, goodbye, enjoy the time you're here because you're gone. You know something? The voters were disfranchised because the former city council wasn't transparent and made apparent. Why did the city of Moore Park and other cities follow this path? Because the city attorney made a bad call and the old city council wanted to stay in power. That's the bottom line. Let's get to the facts here. The city attorney should be an elected position. Okay? During election, I asked the city attorney why we wouldn't do an investigation on what was going on during election. You know what he told me? I don't have to answer you. No questions. This is the same issues that face this city council for years and years. It's a closed little society, and decisions are made behind the scenes, and the public is disenfranchised. And you talk about being disfranchised. I remember the first time I voted. You know something? It wasn't because I was Hispanic or anything. You know what they said? I was sitting up on that dais as I came down there, and 2 people from this city called me trailer trash. So it's not just about the color of your skin, or if you live near an airport, if you walk this community and you have jets going over, and the city council for years ignored their pleas. I can tell you there's all kinds of issues. As far as if we do districting, it looks like we should, because this city council, before this city council, always said, when the lamplighter, when I came in here, the rent's $1,700, you didn't want to do rent stabilization. You told the people, oh, we can't spend that money. It'd be irresponsible. So the point is, here we are in districting. And you know something? I don't know if the city council or the people can be trusted here. I think we need a citizen advisory board. People should put their names in a hat and they should pick out here. We need a separate group of people to make those decisions. You know why? Because the city of Camarillo has had a lot of problems, internal problems. Bruce Fing, the Fiesta Association, I could go on and on and on. The people know about it. And the news media should open this up and look at the facts of what's gone on in this city. Okay, this was a pure cover-up from voters by the old guard to stay in power, because these 2 should have never been elected. And here we are today, folks. You know something? I look at this more than just an election issue. I look as an internal problem. Mr. City Attorney, should you still have a job with this city? Did you give the right advice? Because Safe Harbor wasn't taken seriously. How come every other city took it seriously? Why is it that this city is always in the limelight? Look at what goes on. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, we've got, I believe, a Nash Dingman. I believe, is Nash here? Okay. Again, Nash, if you could keep it to 3 minutes, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name's Nash Dingman. So, as the city attorney mentioned, this may be a little off subject because I'm not concerned so much with districting versus not districting, but as alternatives to block voting for first past the post. the current way we're currently voting. I would be interested in, like the city attorney mentioned, a alternative type of voting, cumulative voting. I was personally thinking a single transferable vote, so one vote, and if your first choice isn't immediately elected, it goes to the second one, to the third choice. So unless you literally choose like someone who is not elected for your first 5 votes, your vote will count. I don't know if that is possible, if it's not allowed, like cumulative voting, and maybe this is the wrong forum to be asking this about. So it was just a consideration of an alternative way to look at this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, next I have just Bill. Is Bill here with us tonight? I have an address. I do not have a last name for Bill. I believe it could very well be. Did you fill one out, Bill? Yeah, it's probably you, Bill. Sorry, I didn't have your last name, and I didn't want to not pronounce it right. Welcome.
Mr. Attorney, Brian Pierick, Mr. Schenkman didn't provide proof, and one of the cases was decided, I think, in the court where a map was available, perhaps allowing the court to understand what might be fair in moving to districts. So I'm an engineer by background, and my thinking as I've listened tonight was, first I hear that you no longer have safe harbor opportunity, and frankly I think that's a shame. But I'm curious if you looked historically at the residence of the members of the city council back some time period, and you looked at where they reside. I'm just curious as to whether or not there's a concentration. Would, the city council members live, in one part of the city predominantly? Or have we in fact maybe had representation from, say, Mission Oaks, from an area around here, from Spanish Hills above Las Posas, whatever. So I'm just really curious. I think maybe you don't have an opportunity to get Mr. Schenkman to give you the justification for his claim, but if you looked at how you might map this, or if you worked early with a demographer, maybe even before your response by the 25th of January, you might have an opportunity to suggest that Mr. Schenkman hasn't produced evidence, and perhaps that we're better off with regard to how representation has occurred over time. Separately, if I were to support districts, I think that I would lean toward 9, for instance, because we're a small city, and what I'm afraid of is that if you had 4 districts and you'd have what's on the south side of 101 and you have what's on the north and the west side of Las Posas as it wraps around the town, and you have one on the other side of Lewis, etc. I don't know whether or not that would be a best representation. My feeling is that if you're going to do the best thing possible under CVRA to really look, have the public from outside our community look at us having done the right thing, just my opinion, I'd probably lean towards many more districts than the minimum. So thank you for your time.
Appreciate your comments. I do have one nonverbal card from Corey Dransfield, and I will share this. He is supporting the moving to city district. I will share this with other council members. And I have one more. Okay. Next, I have Jessica Romero. Jessica is here? Yes. Again, Jessica, 3 minutes if you would. I appreciate it. Welcome.
Sure. Good evening, council members and mayor. I'll keep this brief because I'm a little tired. But I'm also tired because I'm tired of people questioning whether or not I'm a U.S. citizen. And it's, I'm also tired of hearing that people were upset that I spoke Spanish at the candidate forums. But But I just wanted to say that I support district elections, and I hope you listen to your constituents and support district voting as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. All right, I don't have any more blue cards. Would anybody else like to speak on this issue? Yes, why don't you come on down, and if you could give us your name, I'd appreciate it. And again, if you could keep the 3-minute, that would be very much appreciative as well. Welcome.
My name is Neil Dixon, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I actually hadn't planned to speak tonight, but after hearing the other speakers tonight, I felt like I needed to weigh in on this. There's obviously a lot of passion on both sides of this issue, and I understand and hear the pain of the candidates who bravely put their names on the ballot. I've run for office before, and I know it's quite an adventure, and I congratulate every one of you for your efforts, whether you won or lost. It was a worthwhile effort. The issue, in terms of the issue of districting, I think, first of all, I think we maybe give Mr. Shankerman too much credit in terms of his motives for this lawsuit. I think whether for good, better or for worse, I think his motives personally are probably to line his pockets with taxpayer dollars. I think we should do the best we can to minimize his profit in this effort. I think districting, it appears from what the city attorney is saying, the districting is on its way, and we're going to have to deal with that. I do believe, though, in reading the staff report was available online, I read it, that there are clearly advantages to districting, and there are clearly advantages to the general population electing the members of the city council. And I would propose, what is considered a dirty word in politics today, a compromise, the possibility that we would consider both. And the possibility that we would consider something like maybe 3 districts that are represented by districts and 2 at-large candidates. And I think that the positive of that is that if we go to 5 separate districts, you can take an underrepresented group and confine them into a single district, which would allow them only a single candidate and would permanently relegate them to minority status. If you are to allow voters within each district the opportunity to vote both within their district and for at-large members, then that would multiply the power of their vote, that they would have the opportunity to influence up to 3 separate members of a 5-member city council, which would represent a majority. So in that the city council is going to be having meetings to discuss this, I hope that we will consider a wide range of options rather than just the options that were placed on the screen today. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. All right, I don't have any more blue cards. Would anybody else like to address the council on this issue? One gentleman.
I just have a question.
Why don't you come on up to the microphone, if you would, please.
I'd like to recognize the last speaker and indicate that I found his suggestion quite intriguing. The attorney, again, would that be a permitted resolution or would that be a permitted change under CVRA?
I typically respond to the council.
I'm sorry.
Hang on to that.
Let me rephrase it. Let's say that it was 8 districts and that it was 5 that were 5 people were running in districts and 3 were at large. Would such a structure of our ballot, our election, would that be permitted under CVRA? Would the courts allow for that? That's it.
Okay, thank you for your comments. All right, anybody that has not spoken now, would you like to come up? Okay, so with that, do we have any questions of staff at this point? Do we have any comments from staff at this point?
I have 2 questions for the attorney. There were 2 alternatives suggested, and I was wondering if either of those would be allowed. The gentleman over here?
Short answer is no. The government code provides for the choices that I explained when I presented the agenda report. You can have, without a directly elected mayor You can have 5 districts, 7 districts, or 9 districts. If you have an elected mayor, you then would have the elected mayor with 4 districts, or elected mayor with 6 districts, or the elected mayor with 8 districts. You cannot mix and match, except to the extent that I just said. So you can't have, for example, 7 districts with, have 7 council members with 3 of them being at large and 4 of them districts. You cannot do that.
Any other questions? Mr. Perrick, did you have any other comments that you wanted to make at this time, or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. One more chance before we get into deliberation, Council. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask any staff member or Mr. Perrick in general? Okay. With that, this is not a public hearing. This is a departmental item, so we will open it up to council deliberation. And would anybody like to start off with this? Okay, well, we're not. Sure, absolutely. Mr. Tremblay, would you like to start us off?
I'm going to crawl out on my limb first. I need, with the indulgence of the council members, though, I need a few minutes because I want to, this is a highly consequential decision, and I want to lay out my rationale, so I'm hoping that you will give me a couple of minutes.
I think we all need a few minutes.
I think so, too, but given my profession, no disrespect to the city attorney, I have a tendency to go on this. So, first of all, I view this matter through multiple lenses. I view it from the legal side because that's my training and that's my practice and my profession, and I am familiar professionally as an attorney with these specific issues. Second, I look at it from the pragmatic side. This is a highly consequential decision for us. I've given it a lot of thought. I've received lots of input from people whose views I respect. So let me talk about the legal side, and then let me talk about the pragmatic side. On the legal side, for plaintiffs to prove their case in this litigation, among other things, they have to show there exists racially polarized voting in Camarillo. And racially polarized voting, when I make quote, that is the term used in the law, in statute. I think it is important to know that the California Voting Rights Act is very different from the Federal Voting Rights Act. The threshold required to establish a voting rights violation in California is far lower under the CVRA. So, for example, the protected class does not have to be geographically compact. That's under the Section 14028. The proof of intent to discriminate against a protected class is not required under 14028. And the CVRA eliminates, we didn't really get into this tonight, but the CVRA eliminates or does not require the totality of circumstances test that is set forth in the Federal Voting Rights Act. And I know the city attorney did not talk about this, but that totality of circumstances test is not there. Why is that important? That's important because it would otherwise preclude introduction of other evidence in a trial as to why the preferred candidates lost elections. So the consequence, particularly of that last factor, is that it makes CVRA trials, makes litigation in large part, in my view, a statistical exercise based on a complex regression analysis approach, and actually competing regression analysis approaches by both the plaintiffs and the defense, and by expert testimony. because it's going to be experts who are going to be providing that regression analyses. In turn, the cases, and I think it's fair to say, particularly, for example, in the Santa Monica case, which was a 6-week bench trial, correct, not jury trial, bench trial, Mr. Burke, in front of a judge rather than a jury, have potentially very lengthy expert discovery and lengthy trial time. So you have a situation where there is a lot of depositions going on, a lot of discovery. It goes over a long period of time. Well, why am I saying all that? It's because as a consequence of that, the litigation is very expensive. And the staff report indicates, uses the term, I believe, $1 million. As for defense costs, the amount could be in the range of $1 million or more. And not only is it very expensive litigation, but if the city loses, the city would have to pay the plaintiffs their attorney's fees. Hence, you saw the payment of plaintiffs' attorney's fees in the Palmdale case, I believe, and the amount there was in excess of $4 million. Even if the public entity prevails, the flip side isn't true. Even if the public entity prevails in a CVRA litigation, it cannot recover in the vast majority of circumstances attorney's fees against plaintiffs. And the staff report does talk about that. And that's an important thing to note. So literally, this litigation could cost several $1 million through trial and then possibly the appellate courts. The additional kicker here, and I'm sorry, kicker is not a legal term, but the additional thing to note from my standpoint is that there is very little appellate case precedent to guide courts and counsel. And that's specifically noted in page 6, counsel colleagues, it's specifically noted on pages 6 and 7 of the staff report. And most importantly, none of the cases identify, the currently published appellate cases identify the elements that must be proved to establish liability under the CVRA. So that's important. Why? Is because we've got, at this point in time, very little, if any, case law. I juxtapose that against saying, well, okay, but my understanding is that no municipality defendants to date have successfully fought district elections. Put it another way, no public entities have prevailed in a CVRA case verdict to date. Okay, that's the legal side. Now let's go to the pragmatic side, because I've talked about enough as a lawyer. On the pragmatic side, I've received input from a lot of people on this issue and a lot of people whose views I respect. I've also spoken pretty extensively with elected officials and senior management staff in public entities where the elected officials represent districts, as opposed to being elected at large. And incidentally, and interestingly, I guess only to a lawyer, is that there's very little academic research, or a political scientist, there's very little academic research on this that exists. In fact, the Western City magazine, and I promised colleagues that I would refer to the Western City magazine twice tonight, and here I am. The Western City magazine for January, on pages 6 and 7 specifically, talk about transitioning to districts and sustaining effective governance as a council. And it poses several questions about addressing potential impacts and what are key determinations in that process. There are advantages to district elections. Elected officials know their districts well. It allows focus by the elected official on district issues. Arguably, for example, it's easier to have town halls. I don't know if it's ever easy to have town halls, but arguably it's easier because you have a smaller district population. the elected representative represents discrete geographic areas or neighborhoods, so Camarillo Springs, Village at the Park. And there is legitimacy in saying that there is a benefit for those discrete neighborhoods to have a specific voice at the table. Arguably, too, it increases opportunities for candidates, including candidates from protected classes who have felt disenfranchised. And this is important. It can't be minimized. That said, there are disadvantages. We're talking about pragmatics. Let's talk about the disadvantages of district elections. Potentially, it can cause elected officials from districts to focus on their districts and not on the city at large, not on the entity at large. And that induces parochialism. That's a potential issue. As a council member, in my view, probably because I've been elected at large and I'm only 2 years into my first term, you have to have a focus on the entire city when you're making a decision on what's best for the entire city. And also, arguably, it can lead, district elections can lead to, potentially anyway, can lead to factionalism by council members who could be protecting parochial district interests. Actually, I shouldn't use the word parochial. I'll just say protecting district interests and competition among council members for scarce resources. So there is that potential there, too. So let me give you an example. The example would be pavement management. So let's say you've got a very specific pavement management. I'm not going to pick on Mr. Klotzel here. I already picked on him earlier this evening, but you have a very specific pavement management plan that is put into place. And if each district has to be funded equally each year for upkeep of pavement, does that really speak to getting to the most deteriorated areas on a timely basis? This is actually not a great example to use because Camarillo has a pretty darn good pavement management plan, but it's simply an example of where an issue could come in. You could have a council member being overly involved in another council member's district. I'm not saying that would happen, but there is that concern. The Western City magazine raises some really good questions. And actually, I think it's helpful just to quote them. Norms. How could the council build upon and develop norms in this new paradigm? Because there's really a lack of academic research on this. Governance philosophy. Would the transition require the council to create a new governance philosophy or norms to govern its decision-making process? Policy impacts. What impact, if any, would district-based elections have on the city's policies and protocols, such as the procedure for appointing committee members? Teamwork. Could we all continue to work as a cohesive team through the transition? A potential pull toward district-based priorities. Would there be pressure to concentrate on individual districts? How could leaders remain focused on the city as a whole? And a fair and inclusive process. What would be the best way to address specific concerns of a district's constituents? How and when should items be raised to the entire council to ensure awareness of issues that may have citywide impact? And I raise this because these are all good, legitimate issues that if this council goes to a district elections construct, we're going to have to answer. Based on my discussions, there are folks who say, hey, there are ways to successfully manage these issues so that factionalism is not induced. For example, specific policies for council members in approaching their duties and avoiding conflicts with one another. Recognition that as elected officials, we're there to serve the entire city, not just our respective districts. With capital projects, there is a way to, for example, assemble a long-term and approve a long-term capital improvement plan and then assign rating factors in terms of importance and conditions let's go back to pavement management, importance and condition, and then have the council approve that rating scale and then have the council take a list of projects annually, take that to council and have them rank the projects. So bottom line, there are ways to manage cities that have electoral districts in order to avoid these issues. That's the input that I get from speaking to folks who are in districts. So I've got some preliminary conclusions and then finally cut to the chase with some final conclusions. The preliminary conclusions are, I'm skeptical that from a governance standpoint, districts would be superior to at-large. I think it's arguable either way, and that probably doesn't surprise anybody given my profession. I'm also skeptical that districts are really necessary in Camarillo. But that said, there's another issue here, and I think we've heard from some speakers tonight that the issue can be framed as one of opportunity and representative government, not governance. And that inculcates a recognition that it's not about the governance, i.e. at large or district. It's about opportunity and diversity and representative government. And though I will say this decision importantly, very importantly, is about fiscal responsibility. So cutting to the chase, and thanks for your patience. That said, do I think that voting in Camarillo is racially polarized? No. Is there a history of racially polarized voting and discrimination in Camarillo, in my opinion? No, not in the 36 years I've lived here. That said, though, this is a would be, a very costly case to litigate. So the bottom line question, if I want to frame it that way, is it worth spending potentially several $1 million of public taxpayer funds to prevail in a case and perhaps create new case law? And I speak from this from a perspective of having just semi-retired from representing a very large client in this county where a litigation was filed with constitutional implications in 2011 and we recently got through the California Supreme Court in 2017, 2018, almost 7 years later, at the cost of several $1 million of public taxpayer funds in defense. And the answer to the question, in my view, is it worth spending potentially $7 million of public taxpayer funds to potentially prevail in a case and potentially create new case law? The answer is no, not from my view. And is it worth, if the city loses, then having to pay attorney's fees to the plaintiffs? And the answer is, in my opinion, no. It's not a prudent use of public funds. I think the city would be wise to use those funds for other purposes other than this litigation. And secondly, there is a factor on whether this may create more opportunity for candidates and more representative government. And it's hard for me intellectually and philosophically to argue that that's a bad thing. Seems to me that's a good thing. So for all those reasons, my view is that I'm in support. Thank you for giving me the chance to go through this at length. I'm going to support option number 1 in the staff report for transitioning from at-large to district-based elections. And I assure you, as I said at the beginning, I've given this an awful lot of thought because I agree this is a highly consequential decision. Thank you.
Ms. Craven?
Yeah, I appreciate Mr. Tremblay's ability to lay everything out over here and then over here and then over here and back. And I understand that's because he does that professionally. I go about things in a different manner, and I probably will take just as much time. I think we all have to listen to what everybody has to say up here because we're all part of a very important decision. But first of all, I'm frustrated. I'm really frustrated. Earlier tonight, when we started talking about legislation, I said that our policy, our legislative platform probably wouldn't cover everything that the legislature would dream up and come up with. This is one instance I don't think our legislative policy would have covered. I'm frustrated that this issue wasn't brought to our attention by the League or anybody else when it was being developed just a few years ago, and we didn't have an opportunity. We did have the opportunity if we had known about it, but we didn't. The cities, so far as I ever heard, didn't go in and try to get this law as it was being developed so it was more definitive and had more specificity. I really think that was a shame. And I'm frustrated about that because I feel that in the past we have done a good job about helping develop legislation, and I think that the law, the California law, is not a good law, and I'll tell you why. There's the federal law and a state law, and they both require voting by districts if it can be shown that a minority vote is diluted by not having a district of its own. The federal law very clearly states that a district must be able to be drawn with a majority of the minority's voters. However, the state law does not have that type of specificity. It says you don't have to, but it doesn't say what you do have to have. And that makes it hard to know what on earth is going on. It's like a lot of other things in this state, but I'm not going to go there. I believe that the legislature many times tries to make it known that it's taking a stand, but it doesn't get down into how to develop state laws that everybody can comply with easily. So the state law does not have any specificity as to exactly what it requires. Camarillo is fully compliant with the federal law right now. The state law is not clear, and its terms have not been defined by the California courts, as our attorney and Mr. Tremblay have said. Because of comments, I want to make it clear that it's important for everybody to know that the City Council was completely within its rights to discuss this matter in a closed session after the initial letter was received at the end of August. Anytime anybody writes and says that they're going to sue us if we don't do something is a potential lawsuit. And a potential lawsuit is one of the things that is specifically listed as a reason in the Brown Act for going into closed sessions. So we had every right to do that. We weren't trying to hide things. It was what we should have done. We should have discussed it, and we did. Additionally, the City Council did not break any law by not taking action within 45 days of receipt of the letter. We're going to be liable for some attorney fees because we did not comply with his request within 45 days, but that's not breaking the law. We broke no law, and people need to understand that. I think that one thing that's lost in all of this discussion is critical thinking. In some of the cities, they snapped to. They didn't really gather anything. The threat of a lawsuit said, we're going to do what he says. And I don't think that's necessarily the right way. I think that we got statistics, we got the information. It took longer. One reason was we got the first letter after the August council meeting, so the next meeting was in September. I'm not saying that was Mr. Shankman's intention. I'm just saying it just happened. But I'm frustrated, as I said earlier, and I'm frustrated by something else, because I believe that people don't need to take Mr. Shankman's word as gospel. Somebody needs to take a stand and find out exactly how the California courts are going to interpret this law. However, the way the law was written, I'm not sure anybody's going to do that. And I think that Mr. Shankman and his ilk are going to shake down every single government agency in the state of California until they have successfully gotten each and every city, school district, and special district in the state of California to vote by districts. And understand, I'm convinced that Mr. Shankman and his firm have no interest in the voting rights of minorities at all. Their only interest in sending out those letters is to get a minimum of $30,000 and then more. They're earning millions and millions of dollars every year just on this one Voting Rights Act. If we decide not to draw the city up into districts, it will not be the first time that Camarillo was a test case for something in the courts that other people didn't go to. Camarillo's residents adopted a growth control ordinance in June of 1982. It was pretty much a copy of the Thousand Oaks ordinance. Excuse me, Mr. Morgan, if you're out there listening. But the number was changed. It was the number of residences allowed per year were reduced somewhat because Camarillo's population was less. Pardee decided to sue Camarillo. Nobody sued Thousand Oaks or the other cities which had already adopted same ordinance. Camarillo went to the Supreme Court twice and successfully defended that. It was expensive, but sometimes somebody has to take a stand to defend things. For the past 32 years, I've been extremely physically conservative, making sure that we save the city's money to build up healthy reserves. I have consistently handled the people's money much more conservatively than I handle my own money. It's part of my frustration because I have made sure, or I have been one person who's tried to make sure that the city did build up a healthy reserve, feeling that healthy reserve was important for a rainy day or whatever we needed the money for. And I'd hate for Mr. Shankman to take all of that money. I sound like I'm rambling, but I'm trying to explain the frustration I've been going through since August 29th when I read the letter that I received from the city attorney on the day that it was sent to him. If you look at my background and look at what I've done and supported through the years, you'll see that I have not discriminated against minorities or done anything to hinder them. I've tried to help in every way I could. If you go back to my hometown in southern New Mexico, West Texas, 4 miles from the Mexican border, you can ask people who are old enough to remember and they'll tell you that I was a leader in non-discrimination in the late 50s and early 60s while I lived there. Look at what I did before being elected to the city council, and you'll find that I spent years working for housing for farm workers and low-income families in Camarillo and elsewhere in Ventura County. My friend Gene Scott and I were instrumental in getting the Article 34 referendum passed by more than 2/3 of the Camarillo voters so that Camarillo could participate in housing for people with low incomes. Get closer to home and ask any of our tenants at any of my husband and my rental properties, the majority of whom are minorities, and you'll hear them say that my husband and I are the best landlords they've ever had. They tell him that all the time. They need something, he gets it for them. He doesn't make them wait for anything. So having said all that and having thought it out a lot, I'm still frustrated as I've gone through the thought process in the last 2 weeks about dividing the city. I feel like we are being bullied into dividing the city into districts for several reasons. I do not believe that the people of Camarillo vote ethnically. I just don't believe that. That has not been shown by election results by precinct. Further, I do not... I've got a page 3 here someplace. Further, I do not believe that the white people, any place around here, only vote for white people, or that Latinos only vote for Latinos. And that is the implication of this law. And I find it offensive to even say that. By dividing the city into districts, each voter will only be able to vote for one council member once every 4 years, instead of helping to select all of the people who will represent him or her to determine the future of the city. The council member elected to represent a specific district will have the interests of that particular district in mind, and I don't believe will necessarily have the interests of the city as a whole. And I believe that is a tremendous detriment. Our minority population is dispersed throughout the city. There is no geographic area that is large enough where a district could be gerrymandered that would have a majority of any minority ethnicity. I don't support, philosophically, I don't support separating the city into districts. I don't believe it's in the best interests of anybody, including the minorities. And by the way, the law doesn't talk about apartment renters or about homeowners. The law talks about protected classes as being ethnicities, and especially with the examples they give. I believe that in Camarillo's case, the only person who would benefit from changing to districts is Mr. Shankman. I think that, or from not changing to districts and by going through a lawsuit, the other part of my frustration. He knows that we have $10 million plus in the undesignated reserve, and I'm sure he'd love to get his hands on it. So having said all that, I don't feel there's any chance of winning this. The cards are stacked against us. Santa Monica only has 18% Hispanic population, and they lost in court. There was no way they could divide or in any way form a district of equal numbers, which is what we have to have, that would have a majority of minority voters in it, and they lost. So I think that I am forced, I think more strongly than Mr. Tremblay does, but I feel forced, I feel my hands behind my back until I say uncle, but we're forced to take number one.
All right. Anyone else? Ms. Santangelo?
I promise I didn't steal Mr. Tremblay's speech, but I laid things out and my thought process was very similar. So I too looked at it first in the legal question, knowing that there are so many unknowns, knowing that so many people have just switched to districts once receiving the letter, knowing that nobody's really won, knowing that there's no appellate case law, looking at Santa Monica most recently, who is very similar to us. They're a little bigger than us. Actually, I think their Latino population is about 13%, and also unable to draw any districts that would get a majority minority. Yet the judge still found for the plaintiff there. So, and looking at the money being spent. I understand also what we've learned through the experts and through our demographers, and that we have about 22% Latino population, and that potential districts probably wouldn't get us a majority-minority district either. So I understand all of those things, and all the other things that everybody's discussed on the legal side of it. But I also know that we've only had one Latino council member since 1964, and that weighs heavy on me. In my campaign, I ran on diversity as part of the things that I was concerned about, part of my values. And I meant that diversity in terms more more than just race. I talked often about life stages and socioeconomic stages and gender and geographically where we live. So those things are important to me. Mr. Tabor, was that your name? I actually did what you suggested. I got a list of as many of the past city council members as I could and plotted out where they lived in Camarillo. If I'm incorrect, please feel free to correct me. I don't have all of the addresses. But there are, and I'm not going to go through it, I'm not going to take up that time, but there are definite geographical places in Camarillo that have never had anybody on the city council representing that area of the city. And years ago, when we were much smaller, that probably was not very consequential, but there are definite areas of Camarillo today. And I do think that there are unique issues and challenges to those different neighborhoods and areas. I don't think that districting is magically going to make sure that every 4 years we have 22% of our council Latino. I don't think that it's that sort of a fix. But I do want to go through the pros and cons as I see them. Because if this is going to, if we're going to commit to this kind of money to fight this type of litigation, then I need to know if it's worth committing that kind of money and time and effort to do so. So I see districts as a way for city council members to focus on a smaller area, to have more intimate knowledge of the neighborhoods or the district that they represent, the citizens having sort of a go-to person. And I think the benefit of that is that it increases some accountability. So you actually have somebody to go to and somebody to follow up with to find out if your issues have been solved or what you're working on is heading somewhere towards resolution or any progress. I know that I've heard this concern, and I've heard it from others, that it might pit districts against each other. And yeah, that could happen, but I think that sells us a little short. If I were elected in a district, I would be representing that district, but I'm also representing the city. And I think, I know that I would hold in my values to make sure that I'm very carefully weighing what's best for a small neighborhood over what's best for the entire city. I think well, I haven't done it for that long yet, but the people that have been serving on the council probably do that every 2 weeks here, where you actually have to think about competing needs, whether that be two neighborhoods or a smaller neighborhood and the larger city. So I don't think that's something that should be completely say that districting is just a bad idea. I think that's something that we can handle. I think it's really important that we have people that actually live in different areas. I think one of the places I identified, I don't think there's been anybody that has lived south of the 101 on the city council.
Petey Rouse.
Well, see, one person.
Petey Rouse.
But there are definite places that really have not been represented. I'm going to have to fact check with Charlotte every time.
Just understand that at the beginning, there wasn't anything on the other side of the creek or out here.
Right. But so like
So it was
2
just a
months
little
ago,
bit,
yeah, 2 months ago, there were 3 members living, well, 2 members, anyway, very concentrated places in Camarillo. I live near Arneal, and I am the furthest west in the city. The other pros that I see to districting actually indirectly go back to that diversity question. And so while I don't think that districting is going to be a magic solution and change the possible racial profiling, racially profiled voting or voter blocks, I do think, and having just freshly gone through a campaign, I understand how, as a first-time campaigner, the first-time candidate, how intimidating it can be to say, oh my gosh, how many doors do I have to knock on? How much money do I have to raise? How many people do I have to meet? How many people do I have to engage? And I think that that factor in and of itself it tends to keep people out of public service. And I think that's a shame. I think that we should be trying to encourage as many people as possible to run if they want to. There are a lot of qualified, intelligent, hardworking, dedicated people in our community, and we should be encouraging all of them. One of the things that I also spoke about in my campaign was creating opportunity for everybody and creating spaces for everybody. I think that campaigning for smaller districts does that. One of the diversity issues I see with the council is that I don't see people who, a single mom with 4 kids probably is not going to run for city council because it's really difficult to campaign across an entire city. But that person's value should not be excluded from representing our city. That's just one example. I could go through a whole bunch. But if you're able to concentrate on a smaller district, it's less fundraising, it's less money you have to spend to campaign, it's less time knocking on doors. I hate to say that this is a part-time job, but it is a part-time job in that I have a full-time job because I have bills to pay, and that's okay. But there are some people that cannot work around their full-time job and their parenting or whatever other life things they have if you have to look at campaigning the entire city. So I think you get where I'm going here. Campaigning is probably a little bit more doable and probably would encourage that diversity to get more people, not just from different racial backgrounds, but every background, every life stage, every challenge in our city. So I'm not happy with the way Mr. Shankman is doing his thing. I don't like the strong arm tactic either. But I do think that in the end that districts probably benefit us. I don't think it's a magic bullet. I don't think that it doesn't come without its own issues. But weighing the two, I have to lean towards, no, I'm not leaning, I'm embracing districts. And I have to be fiscally responsible, and I just can't see us spending millions of dollars. And if we look at that fund that is somewhere around 10 million, and we look at $1 million at the lowest estimate, maybe 2 to keep going, I'm just throwing it out there, but that's, that's 20% of what's in that fund. So I think you know where I'm heading on this, but I will be choosing. Number one, I just can't justify committing to spending the money and the time and the effort to fight this legally when I think districting can help our community.
Okay. Mr. Moshe.
Thank you. It's only been a little over a month on the job, and already we're going to vote, as Mr. Pierrick said, on, and I agree with you, on one of the most consequential, most probably in the most important votes that I'll certainly ever take, if not some of these individuals up here have ever taken. It will have a significant impact on Camarillo. I think it will change Camarillo. Camarillo is special, and it's unique. And it's not like any other city in Ventura County. In many respects, it's not like any other city in California, as far as I'm concerned. We're different in makeup. We're different in distribution. We're definitely different in how much money we have in the bank and how fiscally responsible and conservative we have been up to this point. So we're not like other cities. And I don't necessarily look at the way other cities have approached this issue in determining how we should necessarily approach that issue. Because up until this point, I feel like that's never been the approach of Camarillo. We do what's in the best interest of our city, independent of what everyone else thinks. We're concerned about our city. We're concerned about our community. And just because other cities decided to capitulate on first receiving the letter, that's their own decision. I do appreciate the city taking the time to discuss this. I do appreciate the fact that the city, again, I can't talk much about it, but in closed session we did extensive research. I do appreciate that, too, that although I do wish it would have been disclosed during the campaign prior to the November elections, I do appreciate that knowing that there may have been a change in the makeup of the city council, that a vote on such an important matter was pushed till after the election. I truly do appreciate that. I do know that it will have cost us more money as a result, but I think that was the right decision in that respect. We didn't come to be who we are by letting others decide our fate. We definitely didn't do it by capitulating to any attorney that came by and said, I'm going to sue you. As Charlotte mentioned, we have written case law in the past, in the 400, or the growth ordinances that were passed in the 80s. We got sued by developers, and we fought it, and I think it was rather expensive in that time, and we prevailed. That's not necessarily to say whether or not we'll prevail in this situation. I am not in favor of districting. I want to be really clear about that. I don't think it is beneficial to our city. I don't think it will weigh necessarily positively, in a positive manner on our city. I think, well, one, I know, I believe, there is no racially polarized voting occurring in Camarillo. There is no vote dilution occurring in Camarillo. I've been involved in Camarillo politics for about 4.5 years. 4 years ago, I personally helped, I was campaign manager for one of these Latinos mentioned in the plaintiff's demand letter. The candidate and I had one conversation ever about his ethnicity and the weight it had in that election. And it was, hey, do we need to mention the fact, do we need to mention your ethnicity? And the answer, and it was a very simple discussion. And the answer was no, because it didn't bear any weight. Because he was running on his qualifications, he wasn't running on his race. And that if he were elected, he'd represent everyone in Camarillo, not just people who identify with his race or who also share his race or his ethnicity. I feel like up until this point, that is the way we've run. We have run on our qualifications. We have run, and we've been elected on our qualifications. There can be diversity achieved on the council through at-large elections. I think Susan and I's election this past November is proof of that. Diversity comes in many different factors. It can come in age, and it can come in ethnicity, and from background. So I understand the argument in this. I think that the argument in this demand letter and kind of the basis of the CVRA is, I believe it has false assumptions and false implications in that someone from one ethnicity can only represent the person from that ethnicity. or that someone from one ethnicity cannot represent people of other ethnicities or socioeconomic backgrounds. I went back and I looked at some of this past election, and where primarily where Charlotte, I, and Susan got our support. Charlotte overwhelmingly took my neighborhood, and a lot of my
You took
neighbors,
mine.
and I took yours. and most of the phone calls and emails that I've received up to this point since being elected have actually come from the far west end of Camarillo, and actually not from my neighborhood. So I don't think that you need to. I think we can represent everyone, regardless of where we live and or in ethnicity. The CVRA, and I know it's the California Voter Rights Act. We need to get past the name of that bill, because it's a flawed piece of legislation. And unfortunately, the way it was written, those flaws are intended to be its features. I believe it is a backdoor method to force policy via trial attorneys, to incentivize trial attorneys to essentially enforce or push, in the case of Sacramento's will, on municipalities, but by doing so in a backdoor way. So that way they don't necessarily need to pass legislation that may be politically unpopular. Because in most communities where they've been served letters like this, or they've been threatened with lawsuits, and in those cases where it has gone, the city council has voted to take it to a vote of the people, overwhelmingly the population votes it down. I do. Well, it should be say, Mr. Shankman, if we were to follow safe harbor provisions, the law says Mr. Shankman is entitled to $30,000 just for serving us a demand letter. We could stay within safe harbor. We could capitulate, and he's still entitled to $30,000. He's entitled to more if you let safe harbor provisions expire. For him, it's a money play. I read his letter, and then I read the same letter he sent to a lot of other municipalities and districts. And it's a form letter. It is literally a form letter. It's fill in the blank. He fills it in. Most of the information he gleaned from Wikipedia. He offers no proof. It's full of inaccuracies. He titled our letter to our city clerk calling her Mr., whereas she is clearly a woman. He couldn't do that enough research to figure that out. In it, he generally makes a claim that he's not sure if any Hispanic had ever been elected to the city council in Camarillo. That is in fact untrue. We've had one. I do believe that districting does in a way disenfranchise voters. I do believe that it would pit neighborhoods against neighborhoods. I do believe that it's going to complicate government. I think it's going to cause disjointedness on the city council. I do think that 20 or 30 years from now, we're going to look back and most cities are going to look back, or maybe in the state will look back and say, maybe that wasn't a great policy. Maybe that wasn't a great decision. I was doing some back of the napkin calculations, and just assuming that we go to 5 districts based on our city's population and the number of registered voters and the turnout of those registered voters in elections. If we went to 5 districts, every district would, this is assuming that everything is kind of equal, there'd be 13,000 people, 13,000 residents in every district. Amongst them, there'd be approximately 8,000 voters. Of those 8,000 voters, approximately 70%, maybe at the high end, really high end, will actually turn out for an election. So if you have 2 candidates, or maybe even 3 candidates running in a district for election, now you're talking about the voter threshold being 2,000 votes, 3,000 votes in order to get on city council. everyone up here had, we had votes from the entire city, and it took 9,000 to 10,000 to upwards near almost 13,000 votes. Very diverse votes from all different ends of the city in order to be elected to city council. But now we're talking about potentially as little as 2,000 to 3,000 votes in a geographic designated geographic region in the city. And those elected officials, although they perform the same duties as we're performing now, their decisions carry the same consequences we carry now. But they're, in many ways, they're only beholden to that very small sliver of Camarillo, but yet they're making decisions that will impact the entire city. I can't wrap my head around that. I can't understand how that is promoting democracy, how that is promoting voter participation. How I don't understand how that is true representation. I see at-large elections, and I understand the arguments in the CVRA. I understand the arguments in this demand letter and the suit from Mr. Shankman and from the people in our community and that they brought forth. But I just believe it's gonna lead to more divisiveness, and that we're going to kind of protect our own turf. And that Camarillo, the last thing I want to see is Camarillo to rip itself apart, and that everything that we've built is ripped apart. So I truly am conflicted. Because on one hand, and I like to say everything I just mentioned, according to the California Voter Rights Act, is almost irrelevant. The only thing the California Voter Rights Act requires is proof of vote dilution and racially polarized voting. It hasn't established from a quantitative standpoint, and I think Mr. Tremblay is right, that this is kind of reduced into a statistical game, essentially, a statistical analysis. And the law, being the way it was written intentionally, doesn't establish that. And the courts, up until this point, have not clarified that. So to fight this, we would truly need to either be writing and or defining law. And to the extent in which I understand that, is prohibitively expensive. So this is my main, and I do believe there is a sliver of a chance that we could be victorious in litigation, at least in district court. But then that'll almost undoubtedly lend itself to appeal, and then it'll go up to the appeals court, and that could take, in whatever case, a year or two, and then from there it could become a soccer ball or something like that, kind of kicked around between the courts. It could go back down to district court. It could go up to, I presume, the California State Supreme Court, and that gets very expensive. If we were to do that, and Mr. Shankman wanted to pursue us to the very ends of this, if the ultimate decision is not in our favor, then we become responsible for his attorney's fees through that entire process, wherever that process may lead. We're at his will in some respects, to the extent which the court will permit it, and depending on how, there's a whole lot of legality around it, and I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around it. But this could go trail on for years and years and years. And in that time, we're racking up our bill, and Mr. Shankman's bill will undoubtedly be astronomically higher. And if we were to lose, then we would be on the hook for a whole lot of money. I understand that we have $10.3 million in unbudgeted funds for this fiscal year that we could tap. I don't want to give him a single penny of that. We're going to give him something now, but I'd prefer to give him as little as possible. My conflict is I know that we have over $200 million in the bank in reserves, and I'd hate to see us squander that through what I believe may be could be, yeah. Well, yeah, I just believe that if we do districting, then it may potentially and we become more disjointed, and we lose the vision of serving all of Camarillo, and we go into our, we just serve the people in our little box in our little district, and that's all we're really concerned about at whatever expense, and that we lose the sight of the bigger picture. And we lose sight of all the people we're trying to represent. And this is my conflict. Are we potentially putting at risk tens of millions of dollars in potentially pursuing litigation? And I'm adding both our legal fees and his, assuming that this is, because I think that has to be weighed, assuming that we lose. Or are we putting at risk everything we've built up to this point? And there's a lot of ifs, and there's no guarantee. I could absolutely be wrong about districting. This is my own personal belief, my own personal opinion. So I already see the way the political winds, or the way the votes are likely going to go. And I am seriously conflicted. I am inclined to go with option one, but not necessarily willingly. So.
Okay. Anybody next? Oh, that would be me. One thing about being mayor is you get to you talk. You're the last person to talk, so mostly everything that has been said. So I'll try to reflect my comments. I've been up here for 21 years. This is the toughest, by far, issue that I've had to deal with because it changes the way that the voters of Camarillo elect their representatives here. And I can only speak for myself, but we're a town of 65,000, and I kind of like to represent everybody in the city. At 65,000 people, you can still walk it. You can still get out and meet people. There's a lot of events that you could do. Districting, in my mind, makes some sense. If you're 150,000, 200,000, 300, you can kind of make an argument. Yeah, the city's really big. It's really hard to get out and really know a lot of the voters. But at 65,000, I still think that it's small enough to be able to get out there and meet a lot of new people. And I still really enjoy that. Having read the packets and packets, been dealing this for several months and listened to all my colleagues' comments up here, I still feel the same way about this in that we're going into this fight with one hand tied behind our back. It is not a fair fight. It's not a fair fight in many things, not the least of which is that if we lose, the plaintiff can actually sue us for his legal fees. So it's not just our legal fees, but it's his. But if we win, we cannot sue him. Now, how is that fair? I don't think it is. I'm hopeful that this city and the future electeds up on this dais will still take a citywide approach that every voter is just as important as any other voter. That even if they don't represent your district, that you treat him or her exactly the same. I'm hoping that in the future that they will still have that feeling because that is what all of the current council members and the past council members have been. Many people don't know this, but I was switched at birth with the Ortiz family. And John Ortiz lives in Camarillo, and we laugh about this. And his mom got myself, and my mom got John, and I think they both kind of looked at each other and said, this may not be the right thing. But we switched it out. It was in the 50s, and everything was, I could have been a better baseball player if I'd have been raised in the Ortiz family, but.
And not at the local hospital.
And not at the local. It was at St. John's in Oxnard, Old St. John's. As far as my election, color has made absolutely no difference. I've heard comments of this past election that potentially it has. I apologize to you. This is not the Camarillo that I know. Nobody should have to go through what evidently they did. It's not the Camarillo that I know, and it's not by far the majority of the residents that live in this city. This is an outstanding city that, in my mind, is far, far majority colorblind here. It doesn't matter who you are. It just shouldn't, and it doesn't, and I'm hopeful that it will remain the same, and I believe that it is. As Mr. Mulchay said, Camarillo is a special place in many, many ways. Okay, so let's talk about what the options are tonight very quickly. If we go into litigation, can we win? I'm not concerned. I'm not convinced that we can. Let's talk about the cost of this. The cost could be anywhere of upwards of several $1 million. I believe the city of Palmdale is at $4.5 million. Modesto's at $3 million. Anaheim's at $1.2. Who knows what Santa Monica is? Oh, by the way, maybe some of that money can be spent maybe a little bit wiser, like maybe a senior center, maybe, huh? So I don't begrudge the individual that brought this up. It's a poorly written law, and we live in a state, like all states, there's good laws and bad laws. I think most people will admit that this is a poorly written law, and the individual is taking advantage of this as they see fit. This is an experiment. We do not know how this is going to work out. This is not the beginning of it. This is not the end of it. We are going to have to work very, very hard to see how this is going to all play out, and our work is just beginning here. Let's do the right thing for the citizens of Camarillo here, because that's really what, it's not about any one individual here. It's about what is best for the city. I am not in favor of districting. I do not like people coming into our city and basically telling us what we have to do, and that's specifically what this is. It would have been much better internally if we would have dealt with this problem, but we were not able to do that here. So as far as the campaign go, campaigns are hard. I mean, it's going to be just as hard campaigning as a district as it is in Camarillo as a whole. There'll just be other issues that we're all going to have to deal with, and the future candidates will have to deal with too. As we sit up here and see what is the right way to go about it, what's not the right way to go about it, we just don't know right now. But as far as spending millions of dollars in litigation without having maybe even a 50-50 chance of winning this, I think would be an unwise expenditure of taxpayers' dollars. It's not our money up there. It is your money out there, and all the council members all believe that, and past council members do, and I'm convinced that future council members will be too. So we'll see how this all ends up here. There's going to be some heavy lifting that all of us are going to do here. We're going to try to make it as fair as possible here. But with all the constraints that we've got, we can always, talk about maybe in the future they'll revisit this law and maybe make some appropriations for cities under 100,000. My gosh, I mean, you know, Ojai when Ojai's 7,500 people, you're talking about streets here. I mean, come on. So the issue definitely needs to be addressed at some point here. But our hand, like I say, our hands are somewhat tied behind our back on this. It's a lot of money that, in my opinion, could be spent in better ways for more of the majority of our citizens here. And we'll just see how this goes. Again, we're going to have to do some heavy lifting here. And this is a seaside change in Camarillo, but we're just going to have to make the best of a very difficult situation here. So with that, although I do not like this legislation at all, I will be supporting option number 1. So, yeah.
No.
We've already had you up, Barbara. I'm sorry. You can make a nonverbal if you'd like. Yeah.
No.
As a citizen of Camarillo, I sat here and I listened to the conflict.
Miss Williams,
Been up here. I'm sorry.
public comment is over.
I understand that. But there you have the option 3.
You can write down your
and you can do
comments.
a combination
We
before
can't.
you vote.
No, we can't because the city attorney has already addressed that issue, Barbara.
No, but the option 3 can be to do an all-out full court press to get the lawsuit thrown out and put off your decision based on whether you can get the lawsuit thrown out or not.
Barbara,
and if you don't, then yes, you do it.
Barbara,
So
that's not the option. I'm sorry.
No.
Please sit down. You've already had your opportunities
Once we've started
here.
deliberating, we don't take more comment.
Okay, so with that, are there any other questions of staff or anything like this? Okay, what's the will of the council?
We don't have a will.
We don't have a will, okay. A motion?
Not me. I'm not going to make that motion. Can we put the slide back?
Yeah, I probably don't know where that is.
You want, it's in the agenda.
Page 16.
Page, yeah, it's page 16
Well,
or
it's in
page
the
5 on
agenda.
your
She's got
agenda.
it.
I move that we adopt a resolution declaring the city's intent to transition from at-large to district-based elections pursuant to Elections Code, Section 10010, and direct the city manager to take appropriate action to implement the resolution.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second on that? I'll second that then. Is there any discussion? Okay, please
Doing
vote.
this very reluctantly.
That passes 5-0. Okay, so where does that brings us down to?
Study session?
I believe
Study
that brings
session.
us down to the study session. We have two study sessions to finish up, and we do have some closed sessions. So with that, we will be in recess to the study session and at some point closed sessions as well. We are in recess.